I wield a greatsword at Hogwarts. Author, Nanshan Duxie, synopsis, the Slytherin who least resembled a Slytherin. There was a saying in the Slytherin common room, disobedient young wizards will be eaten by the night demon. He ruled a constellation that shone over Hogwarts, the night demon feared by his enemies. Glory made him Slytherin's pride. When the Dark Lord arrived, he declared, weapons, lots of weapons. With a staff in his left hand and a greatsword in his right, everyone would cry out, bloody sorting hat, is this Slytherin? When the constellation returned to Hogwarts, John Wick's radiance would illuminate the entire wizarding world. Chapter 1, The Magical World in John Wick 1991. Number 6, Privet Drive, Little Whinying, Surrey. Early morning sunlight streamed through the second-floor window and glinted on the wooden floor. The quiet scratch of pencil against sharpener cut through the stillness. The boy paused and looked up as a plump shadow crossed the floor. When he saw who cast it, he muttered to himself, half amused, half incredulous, I know I'm extraordinary, but this is a bit much. At 11, he already towered over other children. Tall and slender in a gray-blue waistcoat and a small suit, with a gold pocket watch chain gleaming on his vest, he handled his pencil sharpener with the careful grace of someone holding crystal. He pushed back from the desk and stepped into the sun. Light spilled over his dark, smooth hair and made his long lashes look like tiny wings. His reddish-brown eyes squinted against the brightness. His thin lips under a straight, handsome nose tightened slightly. Half Slavic, he lacked the freckles typical of many British boys. His fair, delicate face had the air of a noble child from a fairy tale. He arranged his pencils on the desk with precise, almost artistic care. An owl was tapping persistently at the window. It held a letter in its beak and would not be put off. John studied the envelope carefully. Thick parchment, handwriting in emerald green ink. So far, normal enough. But the wax seal was unmistakable. A shield marked with a large H and flanked by 4 animals, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. It can't be, he whispered. From the moment he woke up in this world, John Wick had known he was out of the ordinary. He wasn't just any boy, he was a transmigrator. He shared a name with the legendary John Wick, the killing god from the films, and the name seemed to demand an extraordinary life. By the age of 11, he had trained himself to deadly effect. He could incapacitate 3 men with a pencil, a skill that earned him the nickname Pencil Killer among his peers. He'd always been confident that if danger came, he could reach for a pencil and handle it calmly. But he had never expected to land in a world with wizards, people who could wave a wand, wipe memories, and probe minds for secrets. A world with beings twisted and brilliant enough to be called the likes of Grindelwald or Lord Voldemort. So all that pencil training was wasted, he thought, staring at the neat row of pencils. Then a voice sounded in his head, clear and mechanical. Ding! A hidden corner of the world has been discovered. Starting series quest, Hogwarts. The golden finger, the kind of special interface transmigrators always seemed to get, had been with him since he was 5. A simple panel had appeared in his mind, the reason he could do things like his 3-man pencil move at such a young age. The panel offered quests and had 2 main functions, buffs and skill points. Buffs were game-like bonuses that could stack. Skill points increased his abilities. Both were earned by completing the quests the panel generated. Later, another attribute had appeared on the panel, magic power. That, plus the letter, confirmed the owlish message's authenticity. The letter read, Dear Mr. Wick, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. September 1st? That's a while away, John said aloud. He needed to figure out how to tell his parents, Watson and Mrs. Wick, that their son was a wizard. John, this joke isn't funny, Watson Wick said flatly. Watson, John's father in this life, had golden brown hair, reddish brown eyes, a prominent nose, and the tailored suits of a British professional. John resembled his mother more, Mrs. Kruth. Wick had dark Russian hair and a mature, composed beauty. Both were conservative, middle-class, and utterly unconvinced by their son's claim. You could make a grown man run and apologize to 4 kids with a pencil, Watson said, trying to sound stern and failing to keep a hint of amusement out of his tone. But you can't pull this on your father. It was 3, John shot back. The other one tripped and fell, totally unrelated to me. Is that so? That little fat boy Dudley didn't say that. He ate the apology cake himself, all by himself. I don't know how he managed it. Watson smiled despite himself. As the days passed, the Wick family grew a little less certain. They agreed to give their son a chance, more out of curiosity than belief. The household began calling him Little Wizard, half teasingly, half affectionately. Word leaked out. A few kids mocked him until he calmly brandished a pencil and sent them packing, running home to their mothers. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley and the Giantess. On July 30th, there was a knock on the door. When Watson opened it, a tall woman stood on the step. She wore a dark green robe and square spectacles. Her face was set and serious. She looked every inch the stern, orderly professor John had seen in books. Minerva McGonagall, deputy headmistress, transfiguration professor, and head of Gryffindor. "Mr. Wick," she asked politely, straightening her robes. "May I come in? My name is Minerva McGonagall." John, seeing a character he had only ever read about standing in his living room, lit up and stepped forward with a brilliant smile, inviting her inside. Watson and his wife exchanged astonished looks. Had their son hired an actor? The skeptical couple settled on the sofa and watched as McGonagall took a seat opposite them. John, suddenly shy in front of a legend, scurried about like a dutiful host pouring tea and water. Watson leaned forward and could not hide his doubt. "Are you really a Hogwarts teacher?" he asked, choosing his words as if testing a fantastical claim. McGonagall, used to skeptical parents, did not bristle. She corrected him with calm courtesy. "It's Hogwarts, sir. And if I may, Professor." The couple exchanged another look, fingers tightening on their cups. This was becoming harder to dismiss. Watson pressed on, uncomfortable and blunt. "So my son is a wizard? Does that mean he tears off fingernails from the dead and nails black cats to doorposts?" The question was clumsy and borderline cruel. It earned McGonagall a frown. She answered, reddening, with crisp firmness. "Mr. Wick, only dark wizards commit such horrors. Hogwarts is a genuine school of witchcraft and wizardry." Chapter 2, Sorry. McGonagall realized she'd gone a bit far. Watson's skepticism was understandable, but she couldn't simply expect a Muggle family to accept the impossible. With a small sigh, she drew her wand and flicked it. The teacup Watson was holding shivered, shrank, and became a mouse. It scrambled up his sleeve with a squeak, and Watson screamed as if it had been a snake. It was John's first time seeing real magic. The transfiguration was advanced, precise, impossible to fake across a tea table. From that moment, Watson believed him completely. No matter how much the old manager protested, he couldn't deny what he'd just seen. After McGonagall left, Watson turned into an insatiable child of curiosity. "John, turn the cup into a mouse. John, make the broom sweep by itself. John, can you fly on a broom? John." John got so exasperated he finally used his trump card and had Madam Wick hustle Watson out of the room. July 31st. Time to prepare for Hogwarts. Charing Cross Road. The small, grimy pub stood oddly among the large bookshops and record stores. It was deliberately invisible to most passers-by. Muggle-repelling charms did that. Anyone who'd read Harry Potter would know it. This was where the trip to Diagon Alley began. The Leaky Cauldron's exterior was unremarkable. Inside, it smelled of sweat and sour beer. The three of them wrinkled their noses. Madam Wick fretted before they entered. "John, you're still a child. You can't go into a pub." John protested he wouldn't linger. He didn't care for the place either, but he followed them in. The bald owner peered up from behind the bar when he saw their Muggle clothes and scoffed. "You lot are making me lose a few nuts staying here." Grumpy and clearly cash-minded, he cleared a path and led them to the doorway into Diagon Alley. "3 bricks up from the dustbin, then 2 across," he instructed, tapping the wall. The brickwork parted without a door, revealing the narrow, teeming lane of the wizarding world. "This is magic." John stared as if 2 worlds had split open before him. Even years later, the memory would be vivid. A deep voice rumbled behind them. A giant, at least 3 meters tall, loomed into view in a heavy moleskin coat that gave off a wild, unwashed smell. Beside him, a thin boy in oversized clothes wore round glasses and had vivid green eyes. A lightning-shaped scar peeped from beneath his hair. Hagrid and Harry. John's heart skipped. He'd at least seen the films. Watson and Madam Wick were nearly speechless. Turning a cup into a mouse had been one thing. Hagrid's sheer size and presence terrified them more. The big pair walked on, and John resisted the urge to follow. There was too much shopping to do. First stop, Gringotts. Watson had ignored the goblins' odd exchange rates. 2,000 pounds became 400 galleons, and John still remembered the goblin's greedy face. Still, they now had the funds for the day. John ignored Watson's attempts to hide the coin pouch. He wanted to keep some galleons to show off to friends later. Diagon Alley was a blur of new things. Dragon liver made John's Chinese foodie genes stir. He wanted to try some, but to his parents it was just a pile of bloody organs to avoid. At Flourish and Blot's, Watson's eager fingers nearly lost one to the Monster Book of Monsters when it snapped at a curious hand. John bought all the books on his list, and a few extra about the wizarding world. The hefty Hogwarts, a History, caught his eye and refused to be ignored. Madame Malkin's was next. The stout shopkeeper welcomed them warmly. She thought John was a perfect natural clothes hanger and fussed over him with a pleased smile. Later, Harry would meet a certain spoilt boy named Malfoy there. John noticed the kind of place Madame Malkin made for those who liked being admired. At the cauldron shop, Watson tried to persuade them to buy an automatic stirring cauldron as a novelty and argued it could do for stew what a mixer does for batter. Madam Wick shut that idea down. She wouldn't have a metal pot whirring in the kitchen all the time. The apothecary was worse. The jars with unnameable things bobbing in strange liquids made Madam Wick cover Watson's eyes. Watson turned green at the smell and swallowed hard against the urge to be sick. They fled the shop as if escaping. Chapter 3. Wand and Gift. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands. Since 382 BC, the last stop was the one John had been waiting for. If there was any symbol of the wizarding world, it was the wand. Without one, you might as well stand in the middle of the street and do nothing, no matter who you were. Ollivanders was the most famous wand shop in the world. As expected of a wand maker from 382 BC, truly extraordinary, John murmured, strutting in like a small adult. He even instructed Madam Wick to keep an eye on her overly curious husband. Inside, narrow boxes of wands were stacked floor to ceiling. The cramped shop felt ever narrower under layers of dust. John wondered how Ollivander managed in such a place. From the mountain of boxes, the proprietor appeared with a small, inscrutable smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "A wand, of course. Everyone wants a wand," Ollivander replied before John had finished asking. "A Hogwarts first year. What's your name?" "John Wick." "Very good, Mr. Wick. Which is your dominant hand?" "Right, though I can manage left," John admitted. He'd practiced pencil tricks for years and was a little ambidextrous. "All right then, left." Ollivander had a way of deciding things without much ceremony. He produced an enchanted tape measure and took a quick, precise measurement like a tailor. "Wands are unique," he murmured as he worked. "It is not the wizard who chooses the wand, but the wand which chooses the wizard." With that, he reached up, took down a box, and opened it. Inside lay a black wand. Willow with unicorn hair, 7 3/4 inches. "Try it." John lifted the wand with a jitter of excitement, the first wand he had ever held. He flicked it a little too enthusiastically, and the wooden cabinet across the shop burst apart with a crash, splinters flying. The raw power that bloomed from the wand left John rooted to the spot, stunned and shaking. Section 3. "It doesn't seem to be this one. Let's try another." Ollivander took the wand back carefully and pulled out a mahogany stick from the next box. John took it. The paper box beside him made a muffled rustle. "You are a picky one. Try this. Yew wood, dragon heartstring." Time passed in a blur of wood and cores, none of them right. After trying wand after wand, John's arm went numb, and the neat little shop looked as if a storm had blown through it. Even Watson, kept by his wife at the door, raised an eyebrow and wondered whether Ollivander sold weapons instead of wands. "Mr. Wick," he said, "with all due respect, I have never seen a student this destructive." Every wand John held seemed to detonate or misbehave in his hands, which only made Ollivander more excited. The pickier the customer, the prouder the wand maker felt. "I remember now," he muttered, "there was a wand as picky as you." He slapped his forehead as if he'd just remembered something. The old man climbed the shelves with surprising agility, so quick John wondered how old Ollivander really was, and worried he'd miss a step. After rifling through dusty boxes, he produced one wrapped in cobwebs and blew across it. A cloud of dust scudded away. "Red oak and thunderbird tail feather," Ollivander announced. 9 3/4 inches, flexible and pliant. He smiled as he withdrew the wand and handed it to John with the anticipation of a proud parent. His eyes watched John so intently, it was like watching a daughter walk down the aisle. John felt an inexplicable certainty as soon as he took it. He raised the wand and flicked it once. No bang, just tiny motes of light floated from the tip like dandelion seeds and drifted across his face. "This is it," he said. Ollivander clapped his hands delightedly. Every wand, he said, was a willful child. Helping one find its owner was his greatest joy. "Red oak is passionate for battle," he told John. "They are the warriors of wands." "That sounds better than a pencil," John said with a smile. He was glad he wouldn't have to keep pencils sewn into his coat anymore, and hoped the red oak would be sturdier than graphite. The wand cost 7 galleons. After paying, John went to meet his parents. Watson, fascinated, kept handling the wand and tried to make a morning glory bloom on his wife's head. John yanked the wand back before Watson could do any more mischief. "Oh, right, I still need to buy an owl," John said, slapping his forehead. He'd almost forgotten that Hogwarts didn't use telephones. Without an owl, he'd be forced to use the school's public post, a thought he didn't relish. Aelop's Owl Emporium was alive with flapping and the pungent smell of birds and droppings, a scent Mrs. Wick couldn't tolerate. She stepped outside to wait. Among the cages, John's eye was drawn to a touch of white, a snowy owl. He named her Basil. The owl tilted her round head and fixed her dark eyes on John, as if committing him to memory. Back home, Watson was in an exhibitionist mood, borrowing John's wand to take a flood of pictures. If John's wizarding robe had fit him, he might have posed in it, but it was far too small. He settled for a few informal shots. Mrs. Wick leaned against a cabinet, smiling at her grown son like an indulgent parent. At the same time, Harry received his gift, a snowy owl of his own, named Hedwig. It was, all agreed, one of the happiest days of anyone's life. Then, Mrs. Wick brought out another present. The box wriggled, and John, startled, snatched his wand in a defensive grip before he realized what it was. He opened it to find a small dog, large ears, brown on top of the head and black along the back. A beagle harrier, just a few months old. The puppy launched itself at John, lapping his face with enthusiastic slobber. Mrs. Wick smiled and leaned into Watson. "Your father and I thought we couldn't very well let you take a spider or a mouse to school," she said warmly. "So here's our back-to-school gift." Watson silently mouthed that it had been his wife's idea, though he had secretly wished he could have bought his son a tarantula. John liked the gift. He had no fondness for mice, thanks to an awful memory from the Harry Potter stories involving a greasy man who became a rat, so a dog seemed much nicer. He cradled the puppy, whose tail wagged like a propeller. "Name your pet," his mother said. She'd even named the toy car his grandmother had given him when he was little. John thought for a moment. Tom. A perfectly harmless Tom, he decided. Tom and Jerry, not Lord Voldemort. And so John got his first dog. Chapter 4. Minister of Magic and Sword Saint, September 1st. The Wicks took John to King's Cross. Watson, in suit and tie, kept rereading the directions he'd been given, incredulous. 9 3/4? He'd lived in Britain for years and had never heard of a platform like that. The family wandered up and down the station until John, who knew the story and didn't want to spoil his parents' guesswork, finally led them to the correct spot, the gap between platforms 9 and 10. John turned back to wave and, amid Watson's baffled face, strode straight at the barrier and ran through it. He was juggling more luggage than he should have been, and as he burst through, he collided with a little witch pushing a trolley. Ouch! 2 piles of trunks crashed together. John's years of physical training paid off. He dropped into a stable stance and absorbed the impact, while the other child was sent sprawling, books flying across the platform. Strength versus magic, round 1. Strength 1. "Are you all right?" Scrambling to help the girl up and picking up the scattered textbooks. She was already on her feet, robe fluttering, a mass of bushy brown hair and bright brown eyes, except for 2 large front teeth that were impossible to miss. John didn't think to spare her feelings. "Your front teeth are really big," he blurted, honest to a fault. The girl, Hermione, though John didn't know who she was, went flush with annoyance. As the daughter of dentists, she was extremely self-conscious about her teeth. This was exactly the thing she hated to have pointed out. She muttered a curt, "Thank you," and hurriedly pushed her trolley away, determined not to talk to him further. John, oblivious, stacked the books and ruffled his hair with a grin. "My irresistible charm," he said to himself. Later, on the train, John was early enough to have his pick of compartments. He chose an empty one, sat down, and stared out the window as the countryside slid by. Section 4. In his memory, Weasley was supposed to meet the boy who lived for the first time today. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen that famous scene. "Excuse me, may I sit here?" A hesitant voice spoke up. It was a boy with a round, freckled face who looked timid and uneasy, as if he feared the answer would be no. He wasn't confident at all. This slightly chubby boy was still much slimmer than Dudley. John smiled and said, "Please, have a seat." Neville breathed visibly easier, and only after he stepped into the compartment did he notice that the boy across from him wasn't as harmless looking as he'd first thought. The boy had delicate features, wore a brown wool sweater, and twirled his wand between his fingers like a small, obedient snake. It looked like a cowboy playing ostentatiously with a revolver. Timid Neville shrank back and pressed himself against the window, trying to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. "Croak, Leafu." Neville's toad hopped out, and he quickly scooped it up. He glanced furtively at the black-haired boy with apprehension, worried he'd done something to offend him. The other boy was looking right back, which made Neville lower his head, sure he'd made a mistake. What Neville didn't know was that John had been staring at the toad. Memories stirred. A toad? I remember someone in those stories had a pet like that. Of the few plot points John remembered from this world, beyond the three main characters, there weren't many. One name that did stick, though, was the future Sword Saint of Hogwarts. John put out his hand and smiled. "Hello, I'm John Wick." I'm Neville Longbottom," Neville stammered. Hearing the name, John thought, as expected, the future Sword Saint, a true Gryffindor. Some people claimed Neville was the child of the prophecy. That idea had convinced millions online in John's previous life. John leaned toward the idea of a dual savior. Without Neville slaying a Horcrux, Harry Potter couldn't have won. Without Harry, Neville's act alone would have been impossible. Neither could have done it alone. Neville's nature would make it impossible for him to kill Harry if he learned the truth. A partnership made more sense. When Neville saw John fall silent after hearing his name, he wondered whether he'd better move compartments. The Longbottoms weren't well regarded among pure-blood families on the same footing as the Weasleys. Their awkward quiet was broken by another voice from the corridor. "May I sit here?" Curly hair and prominent front teeth made a bright, determined girl appear, Hermione Granger. Neville thought another person might ease the tension and hurried, "No one's here." Hermione tilted her head, a habitual gesture, and took the empty seat. She'd met the black-haired boy earlier that morning. He had made a remark about her teeth, which had dimmed her mood. Neville, relieved someone else was there, saw Hermione's expression change and worried he'd said something rude again. The silence stretched until Hermione extended her hand with a softer tone than her usual sharpness. "Hermione Granger." "Neville Longbottom," he replied, exhaling in relief. The quiet had been getting to him. John added, "John Wick," and recognized Hermione as one of the three central figures. She didn't stay upset for long. Fundamentally, she was kind-hearted. On hearing that Neville's parents were both wizards, she grew curious. "So, can you do magic? Children of magical families must have been exposed to it early, right? Can you show me?" Neville stammered, unable to answer, while Hermione's questions tumbled out in rapid succession. John smiled at the scene. Hermione really did interrogate everything to the bottom. He put his wand down and rescued Neville. "Talent varies. My family are muggles, yet I can do magic." Hermione felt less offended and oddly more sympathetic on learning John was from a muggle family. The two of them chatted excitedly about the wonders of the magical world, occasionally nudging Neville for details. The compartment's mood lightened. After a while, Neville realized his toad was missing again. Hermione, eager to help, volunteered to search the train, and asked John if he wanted to come. John, content to sit and holding a freshly bought chocolate frog, waved his hand. "I'll stay here. Wouldn't want someone to take my seat." Hermione thought that made sense and took Neville to look for Lifu. Chapter 5. The Meeting of the Three in Hogwarts. They returned sometime after the train had started moving. "Oh my goodness, John, you absolutely won't believe who I saw." Neville was still buzzing, making it hard for John to make sense of him. Hermione spoke more clearly. "Harry Potter, the boy who lived, is on the train." Recalling how ordinary the famous boy looked, Hermione puffed up a little and declared, "He's not that special." Neville protested, "But my gran says Harry Potter defeated you-know-who and saved the wizarding world." They argued, and John realized the epic meeting of the trio he'd missed had happened on this train. He felt a twinge of regret. He'd managed to forget it. The train ran for several hours and reached Hogwarts after dark. At Hermione's suggestion, John changed into school robes. They only amplified the mysterious air his good looks already lent him. Before they got off, John could see Hagrid's huge silhouette through the carriage window. The giant held a lantern, easily visible in the night. The first years marveled. The older students left in an orderly line behind their prefects. John noticed a red-haired boy beside the famous Potter, a Weasley, unmistakable. Under Hagrid's guidance, the new students moved to boats on the Black Lake. John glanced at Neville before boarding. "Neville, did you find your toad?" Neville's face froze. Excited by seeing Harry, he'd entirely forgotten about Lifu. Now on the boats, the toad was still missing, and Neville looked ready to cry. John wasn't worried. He remembered that Neville's toad always reappeared at Hogwarts. He'd wondered in the films where the toad had hidden, disappearing on the train only to be found at the castle. Maybe it had some knack for magical concealment. "Heads down!" Hagrid's booming voice made Hermione and Neville duck instinctively. John alone didn't bother. Only someone Hagrid's size needed to hunch. The boats crossed the lake, and the first years stepped onto solid ground. Hogwarts rose before them like a castle from another age, brooding and full of history. They climbed the stone steps to the entrance, where a stern Professor McGonagall waited, wearing a pointed black hat that added even more severity to her expression. She nodded to Hagrid and said, "Welcome to Hogwarts." Ding! Hogwarts Stage Task 1 activated. Spend the first academic year as a magic apprentice. Task reward, Magic Blood +1, any point +2. Note, triggering corresponding tasks grants task reward buffs. As Professor McGonagall spoke, John received a system prompt. For a moment he daydreamed while a transparent panel, like writing on glass, appeared before him. It was simple and divided into 4 sections. Charms, Alohomora, level 3. Skills, Short Weapon Mastery, level 7. Polearm Mastery, level 6. Heavy Weapon Mastery, level 3. Firearm Mastery. Buffs, Physical Enhancement, Quick Attack, Precision. John blinked dry eyes. After returning from Diagon Alley, he'd spent a month studying magic, getting Alohomora to level 3 and picking up a Charms attribute. Level 1 Alohomora could open simple latches, Level 2 could pick most door locks, and Level 3 had even opened his father's safe, an impulsive experiment that had led him to the pistol inside and the stray Firearm Mastery Level 1 he'd gained. Professor McGonagall continued to introduce the 4 houses, but John, already familiar with it, wasn't listening closely. Neville suddenly spotted Lifu on the steps and cried out in surprise before dashing forward. Section 5. The whispered laughter spread through the line like wildfire. Neville shuffled back to his place, humiliated and clumsy. McGonagall turned to prepare for the sorting, and the commotion gradually died down. Draco Malfoy, hair slicked back with an arrogance well beyond his years, had already started what would become a lifetime of antagonism with the boy who lived, Harry Potter. "Looks like what they said on the train was true," Malfoy announced loudly. "Harry Potter is coming to Hogwarts." Flanked by his 2 inseparable cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, Malfoy stepped up and announced himself to Harry, Draco Malfoy. He carried himself with the proud, entitled manner of a pure-blood aristocrat. Ron's face darkened. The Weasleys were the sort of family Malfoy loved to sneer at. Ron scoffed, just loud enough for Malfoy to hear. Malfoy turned his head, appraising Ron with thin disdain. "Red hair, patched robes, you must be a Weasley," he said. Ron bristled. The Weasley family was large and poor, and the twins and older brothers had left hand-me-downs for the younger ones. Malfoy's insult hit where it hurt. Then, turning to Harry, Malfoy offered himself with a smirk. "Potter, you'll soon find some wizarding families are superior to others. No one wants to be friends with the wrong sort. I can help you." Harry declined politely. "I think I can tell the good from the bad for myself, thanks." John, standing a few paces away, couldn't help but shake his head at the display. He hadn't expected to find such blatant snobbery in person. He stepped forward toward Neville, and Hermione followed him. She looked worried, sure he might snap, as hitting someone on the first day would be an unwise start. But McGonagall returned before anything happened and shepherded the new students into the Great Hall. The hall was as grand as the stories. A sky enchanted over their heads that glittered with stars, hundreds of candles floating in midair. 4 long tables stretched down the room, trimmed in the colors of the houses: Gryffindor red and gold, Ravenclaw blue and gray, Slytherin green and silver, Hufflepuff yellow and black. Enormous hourglasses near the staff table stood ready to keep house points. As the older students watched the newcomers file in, Hermione chattered non-stop about every ridiculous detail she'd read in Hogwarts, a history. John listened politely, more interested in the kindly bearded man at the head table, the headmaster. Albus Dumbledore's presence was impossible to ignore. The most powerful wizard in the world, a bulwark against dark times, the one even 2 Dark Lords had feared. Dumbledore caught John's stare and gave him a twinkling wink that somehow made everyone relax. Chapter 6. Sorting and Brawl. Dumbledore's opening remarks wandered through the history of the school, and with a grin, he warned them about the dangerous corridor on the right of the 4th floor. John thought the warning had "curiosity bait" written all over it and inwardly rolled his eyes. Then the sorting began. Hannah Abbott went first and was placed in Hufflepuff. Hermione was called and sat nervously until the sorting hat shouted, "Gryffindor." She turned to John with an encouraging smile. No one wanted to be separated from friends. "John Wick," McGonagall called. John stepped forward. He was used to attracting attention. His dark hair and neat robes seemed to make girls whisper and blush, but he tried not to let it bother him. The sorting hat was set upon his head, and his nose twitched at the sight of a spider scurrying along the brim. The hat's voice, dry and impatient, murmured in his ear. What an impetuous little wizard, as proud as a Slytherin. John flushed. He hadn't expected the hat to catch his thoughts. He asked before he could stop himself, "Is this legilimency?" The hat chuckled. "Legilimency? A young wizard knows such things? No, nothing so crude. I read more than minds. Oh, what a difficult choice. Courage and a thirst for adventure, yet hard-working and kind, shrewdness and ambition, honor and dedication, very Slytherin compatible." John blinked. The hat had mentioned everything but wisdom. Was it implying he was foolish? And Slytherin? He was not from one of the old pure-blood families. He had no bloodline to boast about. Ambition? He only wanted to be a great wizard like Dumbledore. Still, the hat hesitated, muttering as if torn, before it finally announced, "Slytherin." John stared. Slytherin, the house everyone associated with pure-blood pride. People in the hall murmured and craned their necks. Hermione and Neville's faces fell. They looked genuinely worried for him. John felt the weight of 100 stares as he made his way to the Slytherin table. One empty seat remained beside a pale, arrogant boy with a sharp face, Draco Malfoy. Malfoy assumed the new boy must be of similar breeding. When John sat, Malfoy extended a hand with a polite smirk. "Draco Malfoy, of the ancient house of Malfoy." John shook his hand with a guarded smile. "John Wick." Malfoy's interest warmed. This boy had manners. Perhaps he could be useful. "Are you pure-blood or half-blood?" John met Malfoy's expectant, superior gaze and replied evenly, "Neither." Malfoy's confident expression froze. "Neither?" That could only mean he didn't bother to hide it. He spat the word like a curse. "Mudblood." The word fell like a stone. The hall exploded. What followed lasted only moments, but felt much longer. Malfoy's hissed slur hit a nerve. Before anyone could properly react, John moved, and the room was a blur. Crab's scream, Goyle's yelp, the sound of a bench overturned. Professor McGonagall's voice cracked like a whip. Chaos spread through the tables as students shouted and staff rushed up from the teacher's table. When order was finally restored, Malfoy was pale and clutching his head. blood ran from a split lip. Crabbe and Goyle were nursing bruises and a fork embedded in Goyle's hand. The uproar had earned John immediate attention from the staff. He had struck quickly and mercilessly in response to the insult, and not only Malfoy had come off worse. The consequences were swift. Slytherin lost a terrifying amount of house points. Snape's face was a thundercloud, and the possibility of expulsion hung in the air like a threat. Dumbledore, calm as ever, intervened. Thanks to him and a few stern words from McGonagall, John avoided immediate expulsion, but there was no escaping punishment. He spent his first night at Hogwarts not in the common room, but in the hospital wing, under Madame Pomfrey's watchful eye. Afterwards, after apologies, lectures, and a particularly excruciating conversation with Filch, John found himself in the trophy room with a rag in his hand, meticulously polishing a medal that had once belonged to James Potter. Filch hovered, disapproving. Hitting the son of a school governor on the first day and then being allowed to clean trophies was leniency by any standard. John kept his hands steady. He thought of the look Malfoy had given him and the slur that had started it all. He'd defend himself and his pride if need be, and if that meant earning a few weeks of scorn, so be it. Slytherin's points had been slashed. Snape had simmed so darkly his expression looked almost wet. If Dumbledore hadn't stepped in, John knew he might have been shown the castle gates on his first night. Section 6. As punishment, John had to polish the trophies in the trophy room for 2 months. Word spread through Hogwarts within days. He became the most notorious student of the year. Filch's cat, Madame Norris, licked her paws as usual. Although she was a large Maine Coon, she was impossibly thin. John finished his shift and waved to her. "Bye, Madame Norris. I'll bring you some cat food tomorrow. You're way too skinny." He slipped out of the trophy room before Filch could spot him and headed back to the Slytherin common room. When he entered, conversations died away. The other students still remembered his brutal display at the start of term. Some had begun whispering that he was the boogeyman. The nickname came from his hair and the ferocity he'd shown in that fight. What to them was almost demon-like. John didn't mind. That whole incident had a purpose. As a wizard from a Muggle family, the quickest way to stop Slytherin bullying was to establish a reputation. He had succeeded. The price was that he had no friends in the house, but there were benefits. He unlocked a task line called Boogeyman. Complete 100 hours of night wandering, and you got the Boogeyman buff. He returned to his dormitory, glad he'd been given a single room to avoid further incidents. Having his own space pleased him. It let him keep a dog and train in private. 3-month-old Tom was in full puppy mode, bouncing around the room and occasionally provoking Basil, the snowy owl. Basil would swat him with a wing. Tom would behave for a few minutes, then the cycle would repeat. First thing after getting back, John started his exercise routine. It was how he built his body and accumulated magic. Strengthen body, improve adaptability to magic through exercise, absorbing ambient magic while working out. Where's the magic apprentice I was promised? I feel like I'm turning into a berserker. He flexed and touched the pronounced muscles. An 8-pack for a first year? Was that normal? The magic he'd trained to accumulate through exercise had become a habit over years. He ended the day with a shower and went to bed. Chapter 7. Snape and the Studious. The next morning, John went to potions. When he sat, an empty space seemed to open around him. By the time the Gryffindors streamed in, he stood out like a sore thumb. Hermione and Neville glanced his way. Worried, John shrugged and gave them a reassuring look. Snape swept into the room, all long robes and scowling presence. He moved with a cold, gliding gait that made his robes billow. "This class does not require you to wave your wands foolishly, nor to recite spells blindly," he said, striding to the podium and folding his arms. His sharp gaze cut across the students. Then, in that slow, venom-laced drawl, "I can teach you how to bewitch the mind, ensnare the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper on death." John couldn't help a small curl of derision. If you could truly teach that, why would Voldemort have gone to all the trouble of making Horcruxes? His attention flickered as he summoned his status panel. Exercise had increased his magic a little. Magic, level 1, 2000. Charms, Alohomora, level 3. Skills, Short weapon mastery, level 7. Polearm mastery, level 6. Heavy weapon mastery, level 3. Firearm mastery, level 1. Buffs, strength and body, quick attack, precision fray. He figured he'd get about 5 points of magic from that day's training. Maybe he should get dumbbells for the room. While John was distracted, Snape's cold glare landed on him and he sneered, voice dripping with sarcasm. Perhaps some of you have already acquired a reputation upon arrival at Hogwarts, a small but useful amount of power, and can be arrogant enough not to pay attention in my class. John snapped back to attention. Malfoy, sitting beside him, was grinning. Snape turned his disdainful attention to Harry Potter. "Mr. Potter," he said, "tell me, what would you get if you added powdered asphodel root to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry, who had only just discovered he was a wizard, shook his head. Snape ignored Hermione's raised hand and kept pressing. "Mr. Potter, if I asked you to find me a bezoar, where would you look?" "I don't know, Professor." "And the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "I don't know." It was painfully obvious Snape had it in for the boy who lived. John watched, amused. This was a famous bit of classroom theater. He chuckled, and Snape's hatred shifted toward him. "Mr. Wick, perhaps you can tell Mr. Potter the answers to the questions I've just asked." John blinked. How had he been dragged into this? A notification pinged in his head. Ding. Plot quest triggered. Answer Professor Snape's questions and gain the buff. Studious. Studious. Gain 2 hours of enhanced learning efficiency daily. He remembered this section. Faintly, he didn't know everything, but he did know Snape's 3 famous questions. He stood and answered without servility or arrogance. Powdered asphodel root added to wormwood makes the draught of living death. A bezoar is found in the stomach of a goat. There's no difference between monkshood and wolfsbane. It's the same plant. He smiled a little. The classroom fell silent. Malfoy's grin froze. Snape's surprise mixed with annoyance. His setup had failed. "Sit down," Snape said icily. 5 points to Slytherin, 5 from Gryffindor. Whether he liked it or not, the points had to be awarded and removed. John sat as a notification told him he'd gained the studious buff. Snape's unspent ire seemed to set the rest of the class on edge. Malfoy, who'd been eager to see John made a fool of, was now cowed. Harry, Ron, and the other Gryffindors looked at John with something like admiration. After potions, the Slytherins spilled out in small groups, and John found himself alone in the crowd, solitary as ever. At dinner in the Great Hall, John looked at the spread and sighed. Every now and then he missed Chinese food, despite having eaten British fare for years. Hermione came over, and seeing him fidget with a jacket potato, asked worriedly, "John, are you all right?" She was genuinely concerned about his situation in Slytherin, though she underestimated him. John was wondering why anyone ate potatoes with the skin on when he answered casually, "I'm fine. Haven't you noticed they're all a bit afraid of me?" Still, to ease Hermione's worry, he decided to make a small peace with Malfoy. When Malfoy passed by, John called to him, "Malfoy." Malfoy stopped and watched warily, taking a step back. Feeling smug, John said, "Wick, what do you want to do, you?" Malfoy's anger flared. "If you say anything stupid, I won't hesitate to send you to the hospital wing," John said with a pleasant smile that put Malfoy on edge. He patted Malfoy's shoulder. "Don't worry. I'm not a devil. We're classmates. We'll see each other around, so I won't go too far." He even smiled at Crabbe and Goyle, who visibly shivered and nodded. "See? Crabbe and Goyle agree. Let's be civil." Malfoy scowled at his cronies. "You 2 idiots," he snapped. Looking at John's outstretched hand, he spat, "I refuse to be friends with you, and don't think you can be arrogant just because you ambushed and beat me. Wizards settle things with magic, not fists." John withdrew his hand. "Fine. Take your honor seriously. Find a place and we'll have a proper duel. Don't nobles like duels? I'll satisfy you." That made Malfoy panic. His neck still hurt. He clammed up, lowered his head, and slunk away. John sat back down and told a stunned Hermione, "See? No problem at all." Hermione wasn't convinced. A studious mind always looks at things differently. She launched into a potion-related discussion with John, and his head started to hurt. He ate quickly, left the jacket potato, and excused himself. He only knew those 3 answers. The rest of potion class was beyond him. A flight of owls arrived overhead, and Neville received his remembrall. John thought, not for the first time, that Hogwarts had one very practical advantage. short class periods, long breaks, and weekends. Section 7. Over the weekend, John Wick trained his body, running along the Black Lake with a head-sized stone strapped to his back. Watching his magic stats climb gave him the same rush as playing a game. He hadn't forgotten how dangerous the wizarding world could be. He'd seen Professor Quirrell in class this week and remembered that choking, awful smell. In his past life, he'd only seen the movie and had a sketchy memory of the book, but he did recall Voldemort on Quirrell's head. He hadn't understood then how the Dark Lord could tolerate that stench. He didn't remember the details clearly, only that Quirrell ended up possessed and was defeated by Harry. All the same, John told himself, I can't ignore that kind of danger. I have to get stronger fast. Reality isn't a story where you can ignore small threats. Even a little danger can be lethal. He tossed aside the stone, glancing down at his grubby clothes and wondering where he could find some weighted equipment. The second week of term brought another important class, flying. Old brooms were laid out at the feet of every student. Madam Hooch, neat and efficient, expounded on safety again and again, though it didn't help everyone. Neville lost control, shot up, and then dropped his remembrall. He came down heavily and broke his arm. Madam Hooch abandoned the lesson to escort him to the hospital wing, leaving the students of Gryffindor and Slytherin watching one another. Malfoy picked up Neville's remembrall, taunted Harry with it, and then something unexpected happened. Professor McGonagall noticed Harry's seeker talent. John didn't get involved at first. He knew Harry was there, and besides, he was still wrestling with his broom. After several tries, he finally got it under control. Hermione wanted to warn him not to break the rules like those two, but she missed and only stamped her foot in frustration. He wobbled at first, then settled. A small ding sounded in his mind. Gained buff. Pilot. Pilot increases broom speed and control. This is possible? John muttered as he found he could fly freely. Snape, passing by, sneered and walked on. Since ancient times, people coveted the power of flight. Once John had it, he stayed up until the bell. At dinner, he ran into Malfoy, who had lost whatever timidity he'd had on the first day. With Crabbe and Goyle smirking behind him, Malfoy swaggered up. "Wick," he said loudly, "weren't you going to duel me? 11:30 tonight. Trophy room, 3rd floor. I'll be waiting." He strutted away like a cocky peacock. John watched him go and shrugged. Did this kid have too many brave-sounding songs in his head, he wondered. John had to clean the trophy room anyway. Carrying a bag of cat food Madam Wick had sent, he went about his task. Madam Norris sat on the doorframe, her glassy red eyes tracking him. John had gotten used to her by now. He opened the cat food, poured some out, and when he finished polishing the trophies, Madam Norris had finished eating. He scooped her up, pulled a comb from his pocket, and smoothed her matted fur. The cat purred contentedly. Filch must have been out hunting students. He trusted John not to slack off, so John usually cleaned the trophy room alone. He decided to wait for Malfoy's prank to play out. It was 11:30 and no Malfoy, but whispers outside drew his attention. 4 students slipped in: Harry, Ron, Hermione, and a bedraggled Neville. Neville had been locked out of the Gryffindor common room for hours after breaking his arm and forgetting the password. The others had run into him on their way. Both groups froze on seeing each other. "Why are you here?" John asked. Harry looked puzzled. "Malfoy invited us. Are you in on it?" John stared at him. "Do you really think Malfoy took a beating on the first day just for the fun of it?" Harry went speechless. The 5 of them stared for a moment until Harry realized they'd been set up. "We were tricked," he snapped. Ron added, indignant, "Despicable Slytherin. John, I wasn't talking about you." After the start of term scuffle where John had fought off 3 students, Gryffindor regarded him as one of their own. When his name came up, their first joke was always that the sorting hat had been broken. The Weasley twins even joked about washing the hat. Then they heard Filch's voice. John understood immediately. Malfoy hadn't set this up for a duel at all. He'd tipped off Filch. "Oh no, it's Filch! Run!" Harry yelled. They bolted. Neville and Hermione grabbed hold of John and hauled him along without letting him explain. Neville nearly face-planted. John caught him before he did. Footfalls and a cat's meow behind them told them Filch was close. John knew the meow. Madam Norris had betrayed them despite all the food he'd given her. He couldn't help thinking it was a waste. They sprinted from the trophy room to the corridor by Charms class. The four unfit students leaned against the cold stone, gasping. John stood there, hardly winded. Strength versus magic, round 2. Strength won. I told you so, Hermione panted. Malfoy set us up, Harry muttered. He wanted to go straight back to the common room. If they were caught, the consequences could be severe. He cursed Malfoy under his breath. Their escape route got worse. A classroom door creaked open, and Peeves, dressed in clownish rags, flew out. He shrieked at the sight of them. Harry's face dropped. Peeves, please, I don't want to get expelled. I'm going to tell Filch, Peeves cackled. I'll make sure you're all caught. Ron lunged to swat him, but Peeves only screamed louder. Filch came charging. John glared at the poltergeist and felt his temper flare. No wonder Peeves was hated. Peeves saw John, and remembering the ferocity he'd seen on the boy's face that first day, felt a twinge of fear. John flicked his thumb across his throat as he dashed past, a throat-slitting gesture aimed at Peeves. He knew a charm that worked on Peeves and made a mental note to learn it. They ran until they reached a door that wouldn't open. Ron whimpered. It's over. Move aside. Allahumora, John muttered, producing the wand he'd been keeping hidden up his sleeve and casting the unlocking charm. The lock clicked. They slipped inside, shut the door, and pressed their ears to it. Outside, Peeves toyed with Filch and had him cursing like mad. John let his eyes adjust to the dim room and froze. 3 enormous heads turned toward them, each head as big as a man. The creatures' massive bodies filled the space, and their 6 yellow eyes rolled as they stared in surprise. John swallowed. His voice was low. Hermione, Harry, Ron, Neville, look. They turned and were equally frozen. Death versus Filch. No contest. Filch suddenly looked preferable. Without a second thought, John reached for the doorknob and opened the door. 8. Section 8, run. John shouted, snapping the 4 frozen students out of shock. He dragged Neville, whose legs had gone to jelly, out first, and the others scrambled after him. The door slammed shut behind them. Chapter 9. Lesson and Magic Power Upgrade. They ran without a second thought for Filch. Luckily, Filch was searching elsewhere, and they made it to the entrance of the Gryffindor common room. The fat lady in the portrait peered out in surprise. Where have you all been? Don't ask. Open the door. Harry panted. Sweating from the sprint, the group kept glancing back as if expecting the monstrous creature to follow. Harry spoke the password, pig snout, and was about to enter when he stopped. Wait, John, aren't you a Slytherin? John's stomach dropped. He had nearly gone in with them. He watched the portrait swing closed and heard the muffled surprise of the fat lady at seeing Gryffindors and a Slytherin together, then turned to walk back alone. In the corridor, he ran into Malfoy. Malfoy had been waiting to see whether his own scheme had worked. He hadn't expected to bump into John. As Malfoy turned to leave, John blocked him. With his heightened presence, John shoved Malfoy up against the stone wall. You wouldn't want your little nighttime outing to be made known to the headmaster, would you? John said coldly. They were alone in the corridor. Crabbe and Goyle were still in their beds, and Malfoy's cronies were nowhere in sight. Malfoy tried to bluff. What are you going to do? You were out of bed, too. John's face went hard. I don't hold grudges. Usually I get even right away. Before Malfoy could answer, John clamped a hand over his mouth to stop any shouting. With his other hand, he slipped a wand from a sleeve that had been custom modified by Madam Wick. A wand isn't just for casting charms, he murmured. It's a weapon, too. He dangled the wand in front of Malfoy's face. Malfoy's own wand was thin at the tip and wide at the base, and John toyed with it near Malfoy's eyes as if he might jab. Malfoy trembled. Shh! Don't let Filch hear you. He has all sorts of instruments in his office for dealing with troublemakers. The threat unnerved Malfoy. After holding him like that for a moment, John struck, punching Malfoy in the stomach. Malfoy doubled over on the cold stone floor, clutching his midriff, pale and gasping. Remember, John said as he looked down at him, don't try to mess with me again. He took a few steps away, then glanced back. Malfoy was still curled up, unable to get to his feet. John hesitated. If Filch found Malfoy like this, Slytherin would lose house points, and John didn't want Slytherin to end up at the bottom. He walked back and helped Malfoy to the nearest sofa, speaking quietly as he did. We're from the same house, John said. No need to be enemies. As long as you don't pick on me, I won't pick on you. We might even be mates." Malfoy's lips trembled. He was a spoiled pureblood, raised to think himself superior, but today it had left him on the stone floor. John didn't relish hurting him. Only Malfoy's provocation had forced the issue. They went down to the Slytherin common room. John gave the password in front of the damp stone wall, and the entrance opened. He set Malfoy on a sofa. The common room itself was narrow and low-ceilinged, decorated with bones and bronze. The dark colors made it feel cold and dim. Beyond the window, the black lake shimmered, and a giant squid drifted past. John leaned close to Malfoy and whispered, "Like I said, don't be my enemy." Malfoy clutched his stomach and watched John go, uncertain how much he'd actually heard. John left wordlessly and went up to his dormitory. After a day of practice, his magic power had climbed to 65, close to another upgrade. He cleaned up and lay in bed, thinking about the three-headed creature they'd encountered and the trapdoor beneath it. He remembered a weakness, something about music, and fell asleep with the image of that trapdoor in his mind. The next morning, Malfoy strutted past like nothing had happened. He didn't start trouble with John anymore, which meant John's warning had done its job. In the common room, Harry and Ron argued over what might lie under the trapdoor. Harry mentioned the Gringotts robbery and the small package he'd seen with Hagrid. The two of them spun theories and possibilities. Hermione, still cross after arguing with them yesterday, sat with her arms folded and refused to speak to either of them. Hermione flounced over to John and sat down beside him, complaining, "Those two idiots nearly got us eaten by that dog, and they think it's hilarious." John had learned to tune out Hermione's constant chatter. He listened more than he spoke. Neville gravitated toward John, glad to be near someone he trusted. Two Gryffindors and a Slytherin sitting together was an odd sight. After breakfast, John didn't waste the morning. He went straight to training. His routine was rigorous. Morning, run a lap around the Black Lake. Midday, push-ups and frog jumps. Evening, training in the trophy room, then push-ups and sit-ups in his dormitory, plus study. Occasional relaxation, walks with Tom and Basil near the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Once Hagrid had caught him near the forest. John hadn't actually entered, so Hagrid only issued a warning. John hadn't minded the reprimand. In fact, he'd grown used to Fang, Hagrid's boarhound. Fang, disgracefully enough, liked Tom's dog food. Later that morning, his focus paid off. Ding. Magic power upgrade successful. Current magic power, level 2. Jogging by the Black Lake, John wiped his face with a towel, grinning. "Finally," he said. "Now to start charms properly." Though he'd upgraded to level 2, he still only knew one charm well. Practicing Alohomora hadn't been enough. He needed another spell. Thanks to his studious blessing, John learned quickly. Before charms began, he taught himself the levitation charm. He raised his wand and tried it on a fallen leaf. Wingardium Leviosa. He felt some of his magic flow out, and the leaf rose into the air, trembling but hovering under the charm's influence. Magic power, level 2, 10,500. Charms, Alohomora, level 3. Levitation charm, level 1. Skills, short weapon mastery, level 7. Polearm mastery, level 6. Heavy weapon mastery, level 3. Firearms mastery, level 1. Blessings, physical enhancement, quick attack, precision, studious, pilot, long distance runner. Level 1 levitation could only lift light objects for now, but it still made John smile. He was already thinking about the restricted section. Dueling and deeper magic interested him more than simple charms. If he could complete the nighttime task he'd been assigned, he might be able to use the reward to justify going into restricted stacks. A punishment made such a visit more plausible, he figured. Chapter 10. Transfiguration class and the tabby cat. Monday morning, John woke to a familiar, enthusiastic tongue on his face. Tom, eager as ever. He spooned a generous portion of dog food into Tom's bowl, then brushed his teeth and washed up. Looking at himself in the mirror, he felt a jolt of panic. Oh no, transfiguration class! He'd stayed up late the night before and fallen asleep after training. He dashed out and found his alarm clock on the floor, chewing marks and drool all over it. Tom had used it like a toy. No wonder he hadn't heard it. He pulled on his wizard robe and hurried down the dormitory. The Slytherin common room was empty. In the corridor, he envied the Weasley twins for their shortcuts, but he reminded himself his fitness was decent and picked up the pace. Section 9. When he arrived at the Great Hall, there was still time for breakfast. Hermione, who had been scanning the room, waved when she saw him. John sat down beside her, and seeing she was still giving Harry and Ron the cold shoulder, said nothing. "Where's Neville? Did he oversleep or get lost again?" From John's experience, Neville was always misplacing things and wandering off. "His toad's missing," Hermione said through a bite of a buttered bun, crumbs clinging to the corner of her mouth. "He's looking for it in the Gryffindor common room." She had deliberately dawdled to wait for John. Otherwise, at her usual pace, she would already be heading to class. John cut into his fried egg and popped a piece into his mouth. "All right," he said with mock helplessness. "I think I know what to get Neville for Christmas. He needs a proper cage so Lifu can't wander off." Noticing the crumbs at Hermione's mouth, John pointed to his own lips to hint at it. Hermione realized, and her face flushed as if she'd been caught with lipstick on. By the time John was nearly finished eating, Neville finally showed up, looking flustered and disheveled. Lost, of course. This was Neville's fourth time getting lost. John thought a Marauder's map might be the most useful gift of all. Neville pulled out his Remembrall and frowned at the red ball. The Remembrall glowed red whenever something had been forgotten, but Neville never seemed to know what that thing was. John looked him up and down. "Neville, you might not make it to class on time." "Why not?" Neville asked, bewildered. John held up 2 fingers. 2 reasons. First, class is about to start. Second, you need to go back to your dorm. "Because I forgot my robe." Realization hit Neville. He didn't even bother to eat. He dashed off toward the moving staircases, panic written all over him. John made his way to Transfiguration. He'd missed the last lesson because of detention for fighting, and he regretted it. He was interested in the subject, but hazy on the details. In the classroom, the Slytherins and Gryffindors sat apart in their house blocks, and John and Hermione separated into their respective sides. Students always avoided the very front rows. Several of the front seats were among the few left empty. John crossed the room toward one of them. A tabby cat on the podium caught his eye. The cat had odd markings on its face that looked almost like square spectacles. As a fan of plush toys and animals, John was tempted. Though a faint memory of some story about this cat nagged at him, his hand moved faster than his thoughts. He fished a cat treat, one he'd put aside for Madame Norris, out of his pocket, smiled, and reached out to pet the tabby. The action stunned half the room. The cat froze, then broke loose from his hand, leaped down, and in the blink of an eye transformed into an older woman. "Mr. Wick, I think you should find a seat instead of standing there like a statue," Professor McGonagall said, maintaining her composure. John withdrew his hand, instantly remembering the demonstration, Professor McGonagall's animagus form. He felt slightly foolish as he made his way back to his seat. He vowed to himself to be more careful petting strange cats in future. The idea of stroking an animagus and revealing them by accident made him grin at his own imagined embarrassment. Laughter rippled from across the hall. When John glanced back, the Slytherins fell silent. The Gryffindors, however, looked at him with new interest. Even Harry stared with his mouth slightly open, and Hermione, trying to suppress a laugh, rubbed at her quivering curls like a little lion cub calming itself. The stunt had humanized John in their eyes. He had a reckless, charming side. Transfiguration that day focused on changing small objects. John attempted to turn a paperclip into a mouse. Transfiguration was tricky. After many tries, he finally managed to light up the correct incantation, and though it was a very basic transformation, he succeeded before class ended. The result was a small, awkward, lifeless mouse, nowhere near the graceful teacup Professor McGonagall had produced in her demonstration. But it worked. 5 points to Slytherin, the professor announced. She seemed pleased that a student who had missed a class had still managed to produce something acceptable. Even Hermione, usually unflappable, had not finished her own attempt. After class, Hermione hurried to catch up with him. "How did you do that?" she asked, the studious instinct driving her curiosity. John couldn't exactly say he'd cheated, so he told the truth as best he could. He'd seen McGonagall's demonstration before enrolling. Hermione didn't press for more. As they walked through the corridor, John's attention landed on a suit of armor. "John, what are you staring at?" Hermione asked. Even the enchanted portraits leaned forward in interest. John stroked his chin and muttered, "That looks like it has a good weight." The portrait knight peered down in bewilderment, wondering what kind of young wizard would be contemplating lifting armor for exercise. John was all action. The armor itself was bulky and impractical. The sword, however, looked like it could be slung on his back, handy for training and for when he wasn't running. "I'll take the sword tonight," he decided, and something eager lit his eyes. The idea made the suit of armor seem almost nervous. Hermione, besides the common room, spent most of her free hours in the library. She had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge about everything except divination. John tagged along sometimes, mostly to familiarize himself with where the restricted section was. He picked up a copy of the Tales of Beetle the Bard and pretended to read. The library's rules were strict. Madame Pince would enforce them without mercy. Earlier, he'd watched a scandalous sight. Neville, having eaten too many sweets at lunch, chased by a broom and suffering Filch's wrath as a result. John shook his head in sympathy. That night, after finishing his chores in the trophy room, John slipped back to the corridor. Poor Mr. Armor woke up this morning to find his sword gone. The incident became a Hogwarts cold case for a while. Mr. Filch swore it must have been the Weasley twins. Chapter 11. Night Roaming and the Restricted Section. "This sword is quite handy." Basil rotated his round head, curious where John had found it. He fluttered his wings and flew to a spot out of reach, warding off the slobbering dog named Tom that kept sniffing at him. John held the greatsword with both hands. The weapon looked almost as tall as his shoulder, a true medieval knight's blade, steel and heavy, its width about the span of a palm. For John's size it was huge, but that made it perfect for training. He gripped the hilt and lifted. Using the greatsword as a weight, he lashed the blade to his back with a rope and began a routine of push-ups and stretches. Effort brought reward. When John woke the next morning, his magical strength had increased noticeably. Magic, level 2. Alohomora, level 3. Levitation Charm, level 1. Transfiguration, level 1. Skills, Short Weapon Mastery, level 7. Greatsword Mastery, level 3. Firearm Mastery. Buffs, Body Strengthening, Quick Attack, Precision, Studious, Pilot, Long Distance Running. His skill list had shifted. The previous Heavy Weapon Mastery and Polearm Mastery had disappeared and been replaced by Greatsword Mastery. John inspected the weapon thoughtfully. The new Greatsword Mastery felt familiar the moment he picked up the blade, like the combination of two fighting styles into one. He ran through basic slashes, cuts, and thrusts. Even at a beginner level, his form had the polish of someone who'd spent a lot of practical time with weapons. Skill levels were like charms. Level 1 meant a novice stance, just starting. Level 2 was basic competence, able to use what had been learned. Level 3 was intermediate, skilled enough to handle several opponents of similar caliber. Level 4 was professional, the level of a deadly specialist. And Level 5 was master or teacher, someone who could both perform and instruct and who carried unique insights. John's Greatsword Mastery at Level 3 put him solidly into that intermediate, dependable bracket, more than good enough for a young wizard learning his way. Section 10, Level 6, Master, you create your own style. Level 7, Grandmaster, utterly free of form, returning to simplicity. Even a short pencil can strike like a dagger. John's Short Weapon Mastery had reached Level 7. He could be called a Grandmaster in that branch. He could stab 3 flies with a pencil in a second. When the two weapon mastery skills combined, they vanished from his list, but John didn't feel like he'd lost anything. If anything, his understanding of weapon application had deepened. Greatsword Mastery felt like a synthesis of both branches, so it wasn't unfamiliar. Still, he grumbled under his breath, "I'm a wizard. This is almost useless." For John, the priorities were clear. Enhancement first, magic second, charms third, and weapon mastery fourth. After a session of transfiguration practice, he headed to class. With the studious enhancement active, he absorbed new material quickly. He and Hermione had gone over the library's layout again. Tonight, he planned to put that knowledge to use. The 5th-floor corridor at night was quiet. Portraits on the walls looked drowsy, and the suits of medieval armor, oddly weaponless, had somehow found a stick to brandish. Lumos. John's wand tip flared. "Hey!" Turn off that damn light! Oh, woo! The sudden brightness drew complaints from the paintings. John slipped down the hall and reached the library. The library closed at 8, and apart from night owls, it would be empty. Shelves stretched away in hundreds of narrow aisles. Deep inside lay the restricted section, the destination for this trip. John extinguished the wand light when he reached the low, ornamental bolt on the restricted section door. The bolt was more of a deterrent for polite students than a barrier for determined ones. Mr. John Wick planned to be a scoundrel tonight. Click. The door opened with a gentle pull. He didn't have Harry's invisibility cloak, so he moved cautiously. Years of training had given him a quiet, sure step. He slipped into the restricted section without a sound. Sealed tomes lined the shelves. These books weren't unreadable. They were kept locked because they were dangerous. There were dark arts volumes not suitable for students, but with a professor's note, anyone could borrow from the restricted section. John thought of the stern-looking dean, who always seemed ready to pinch flies with his eyebrows, and decided he preferred doing this alone. He lit his wand and began searching. He'd come for the disillusionment charm, but the stacks were vast, and it took time. He pulled one book free out of curiosity, Powerful Potions, leafed through recipes for Veritaserum and Polyjuice Potion, felt a little nauseated at the thought of adding someone's hair, and slid it back. A black and silver volume caught his eye next, but he resisted opening it. Anything dark and ornate could hide curses better left unread. Finally, he found it, Advanced Charms. It contained the disillusionment charm and other high-level charms, even apparition. He closed the book and prepared to leave, but a niggling curiosity pulled him back toward that strange black volume. He took it out and opened it. Ah! A sharp sound burst from the pages. John clapped his hands over his ears and slammed the book shut, but the racket had already carried. Argus Filch, patrolling for rule breakers, heard it and ran for the library. Despite being a squib, Filch had the muscle developed from years of scrubbing castle corridors. "I found you!" Filch bellowed, lantern held high, his hooked nose sniffing like a hunting hound. A cat mew drifted from a nearby shelf, and a delighted grin split his face. Madame Norris and he shared a kind of telepathic rapport. Filch darted toward the sound. As Filch moved away from the library entrance, John slipped out from behind a neighboring shelf and walked past the doorway in plain sight. He paused to give Madame Norris, who was primly licking her fur, a casual thumbs up as he passed. The cat flicked her tail with disdain. The feint had worked perfectly. Back in the dormitory, John dove into practice with manic focus. He pushed himself until the next morning he woke with panda-ringed eyes. After 3 days straight of drills, he finally hit the pattern for Level 1, Disillusionment. Effort, it seemed, paid off. The next day in the Great Hall, 6 long-eared owls swooped toward Harry Potter with a slim package, startling a bacon strip free from Harry's plate and sending it skidding across the floor. A small commotion followed. Minerva McGonagall's message arrived with the package. A letter announcing Quidditch training and, attached, a gleaming Nimbus 2000. Harry, who had an instinctive talent for flying, beamed. He showed Ron. Ron's envy was nearly transparent. His best broom before that had been Charlie's old thing, which now looked like a relic. Harry and Ron hurried off, eager to unwrap the broom before their first lesson. At the same time, Malfoy appeared, Slytherin arrogance unchanged, circling and provoking. John barely glanced at the exchange. He was more bothered by the bacon's toughness, suspecting it might be undercooked rock. Hermione had been peeking at Harry and Ron repeatedly, and now turned to John with a flush of anger. "Unless they apologize to me, don't even think about it," she sniffed. John figured the apology would be a long time coming. He guessed Harry and Ron had probably already forgotten Hermione's offense. Neville fretted over his reddened remembrall again, and John reminded him, somewhat dryly, that he should change his trousers before Charms. This wasn't a pajama party. Chapter 12. The Twins in Quidditch. In Charms class, John managed to earn Professor Flitwick's approval and some house points, nudging Slytherin up slightly on the scoreboard. After classes, he wandered the castle, pausing in front of every large tapestry to walk back and forth 3 times, silently wishing for a training room. It was an odd habit, but anyone who'd read the school books would know why. He was trying to find the room of requirement. He couldn't remember the exact tapestry or place, but there weren't many huge tapestries in Hogwarts. After pacing back and forth 3 times by the 8th-floor tapestry that depicted a troll clubbing Barnabas the Barmy, a wooden door appeared opposite it. He pushed the door open. Inside was a training room for charms. The humanoid practice targets looked ancient, and the dust made the place look as if it hadn't been used in decades. John frowned and waved his wand. Scourgify! Dust leapt from the walls and surfaces and vanished. The room brightened. The practice dummies were sturdy, and a dull, dark wooden training sword lay in a corner, huge and heavy, the kind that must have belonged to someone very strong. John hefted it experimentally. It was heavier than a medieval knight's blade and far more weight than he could wield comfortably. He couldn't use it now, but the room and its equipment were perfect for both spell practice and physical training, killing multiple birds with one stone. Without any offensive spells yet, John focused on simple exercises. Under steady effort, the disillusionment charm advanced to level 2. Disillusionment, he intoned. A liquid-like shimmer spilled over him and began to cloak him, gradually wrapping his body. He lifted a hand and watched as it vanished into the flowing sheen. He felt like a figure made of water. From across the room, someone would barely notice his outline. Up close, there was still a subtle difference from the surroundings. It's like optical camouflage, John said to himself, pleased as he tested the new charm and planned what to practice next. Section 11. With the disillusionment charm, his subsequent night patrols became almost effortless. He left the room of requirement after training. It was already late, so he headed to the trophy room to clean the cases. He took a cat treat from his pocket as a reward for Madame Norris's help and brushed out her matted fur. Have you put on weight? He murmured as he lifted her. She felt heavier than before. He wondered who had been feeding her. Filch usually kept her so thin. Remembering how often she licked herself, John thoughtfully produced a tube of hairball paste. As he left, he saw Filch's sour face grow even uglier, and the caretaker smelled faintly of rotten durian, likely another Weasley twins' masterpiece. Not long after, 2 stealthy clumps of red hair appeared ahead. Identical faces and mischievous grins told him at once, the Weasley twins. John ducked under the disillusionment charm and shadowed them, eavesdropping. George, we can chuck dung bombs in. Wait, Fred. John Wick's still in the trophy room. I don't want to get him involved. All right, we can toss them into Filch's office. What do you say? Perfect, George. It's about time that annoying man got a taste of his own medicine. The twins had been at odds with the caretaker for as long as anyone could remember. As 2 of the school's greatest pranksters, they were always looking for an opportunity. John followed quietly, grateful he'd stayed out of their line of fire. If a dung bomb had hit him, 10 showers might not have removed the smell. The twins didn't notice him. They reached Filch's office and hurled 2 dung bombs inside. The stench that came out made John feel sorry for the poor man. Where on earth would Filch sleep tonight? The odor was strong even for the twins, who fled immediately. John stayed at the doorway, peering in. Filch's office was cluttered. One drawer labeled, confiscated, highly dangerous, contained many forbidden items. Before John could investigate further, Filch's furious stomping sounded down the corridor. As the twins sped off, a pristine scrap of parchment fluttered out and fell at John's feet. He picked it up and felt his heart skip. Now wasn't the time to examine it, but one phrase came to mind before he could think. Marauder's map? Covered by the disillusionment charm, John ran in the opposite direction of the fleeing twins. Filch chased after them, snarling. Back in his dormitory, John took the parchment from his pocket and, with a grin, pulled out his wand. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. The blank parchment filled with ink. Lines spread and converged. Names appeared in an elegant script. Moony, Padfoot, Prongs, Wormtail. The map showed Hogwarts corridors and tiny footprints marking the active people in the castle. It even listed secret passages. Possessing this map was almost like having control of the castle's hidden routes. Filch altered course and headed the wrong way. The Weasley twins made for the Gryffindor common room, cutting through a 5th-floor shortcut. John scanned the map and caught sight of an unexpected name. Quirinus Quirrell. The professor was moving about late at night. John wanted to see if he could find the person whose name everyone feared to speak. The map offered no further clue. It seems the Marauder's map doesn't show everything, John thought, a little disappointed. He watched with amusement as Filch, hunched like a bat, approached a pair of unfortunate night-patrolling lovers. Points would certainly be lost. When he was done, John tapped the parchment with his wand. Mischief managed. He folded the map and tucked it under his pillow. Night patrols suddenly felt much safer, and there were other perks. Besides training, John now had a new pastime, watching the boy who lived train on the Quidditch pitch. It was impressive to watch Harry inherit his father's skill. How could a nearsighted boy with glasses possess such dynamic vision? The golden snitch was tiny, no larger than a walnut, and moved impossibly fast in 3 dimensions. John felt dizzy watching, yet Harry always found and locked onto it. John watched with relish. This was the Savior's practice routine, his private history of triumphs. After Harry's 3rd dizzying dive, Hermione's voice, full of excited trivia, reached him. In 1269, Wizard Council President Barbarous Bragg introduced the Golden Snidget into Quidditch matches, offering 150 galleons for catching one. Later, the Golden Snidget was used in matches as a prize of 150 points. Hunting them became so popular, their numbers dwindled, and eventually the Golden Snitch replaced the Snidget. Hermione's show-offy knowledge left John half amused, half exasperated. She seemed to be treating him as a rival now. As a true studious sort, Hermione clearly didn't like the idea of John scoring more points than she did. That knowledge felt like a whip at his back. He couldn't afford to slow down. A sudden ping of text flashed through his mind like a notification. Ding, challenge mission triggered. Continuously gained more points than Hermione Granger within 1 school year. Buff awarded, Studious 2.0. Studious 2.0, 4 extra hours of increased learning efficiency daily. John was still thinking this over when a flash of gold streaked into the corner of his eye and a broomstick zipped past. There wasn't time to react before a bludger came hurtling toward them. Instinctively, John reached out and caught it. His arm gave a wet, painful pop as if something had dislocated. "Oh my goodness, John, are you all right?" Hermione's scream came too late. The Gryffindor players training on the pitch realized something had gone wrong. The Weasley twins hovered above, grinning. "You caught a bludger with your bare hand. You're a natural beater," Wood exclaimed. "If only you were Gryffindor," George said. "Then we could retire," Fred added in unison. Angelina Johnson, hair braided back, cut through their teasing. "Shut up, you two. His hand looks broken." Harry had dismounted in a hurry. The bludger had been chasing him, and he'd been so focused on the snitch he hadn't noticed John getting hurt. He felt guilty. "It's my fault," he said. John's face was pale. A dislocation was painful even for him. "Can you guys stop talking and get this tied down?" he snapped. The bludger had been heading straight for Hermione. If he'd let go, she would have had a nasty meeting with it. Wood managed to lasso the bludger clumsily. At high speed, it could snap even a beater's bat. With it secured, John breathed easier. He dropped to one knee and, under Hermione's anxious gaze, braced his hand on the turf. Gritting his teeth, he shoved until something popped back into place. Crack. "Ow. That had to hurt," someone muttered. "You should go to the hospital wing," another voice advised. The Gryffindors gathered around, genuinely concerned. Even the twins' teasing had turned into admiration. John waved them off. "Still need more training," he said, and tried to smile at a worried Harry. "This isn't your fault," but Harry insisted. "We should get you checked," he said. Unable to refuse, John allowed Harry to carry him toward the hospital wing. On the way, anyone watching might have guessed John had been hit hard. Madame Pomfrey rarely let students leave her care quickly, but this time she sent him out soon after. John shrugged it off. "See, I told you I was fine," he said, trying to sound casual. Harry, relieved, apologized to Hermione. "Sorry, Hermione, it's my fault for flying too low." "Don't blame you, Harry. No one can predict the trajectory of the Golden Snitch." After that incident, the Cold War between Harry and Hermione finally thawed. Of the 3 of them, only Ron was still sulking. John thought Hermione was a good person, not at all what others made her out to be, and felt he should help patch things up. Days were for study, nights for training. Since being struck once, John had come to understand how important physical fitness was for a wizard. After his last night walk, the restricted section gained a frequent visitor. Disguised with a disillusionment charm, John checked out advanced charms from the restricted section and took the shortcut on the 5th floor to the room of requirement. "I need a place to train," he told the tapestry. He paced in front of the blank wall 3 times, and a wooden door formed. Inside was the same training room as before, candlelit and lined with humanoid targets. This time, he'd brought a medieval greatsword from a suit of armor. "I've pretty much gotten used to the weight of this sword," he thought. Gripping the greatsword, John changed his routine. In the flickering light, the blade scattered silver across the room. Each swing sent a flash toward a target. On impact, the construct shattered into fragments. He moved on, target by target, until the last one fell. The targets were under a restoration charm. Once wholly destroyed, they reformed. It saved him a lot of time. A soft tone sounded in his head. Ding, gain buff. Sword dance. Sword dance increases both the aesthetic and destructive power when wielding sword-type weapons. His hands were sore, and he set the greatsword down. After a night of intense exercise, he could feel his magic reserve strengthening. He'd gained 15 points of magic in a single night. If he kept at it, he could level up again in a few days. He didn't stop with physical training. He began a second round of charms practice. Pushing himself nearly to the limit, his charms improved markedly. The most obvious progress was with the disillusionment charm. Because he had been using it every night, by October it had reached level 3. Magic, level 2, 450-500. Charms, Alohomora, level 3. Levitation charm, level 4. Transfiguration, level 2. Disillusionment charm, level 3. Lumos, level 2. Incendio, level 1. Reducto, level 1. Skills, short weapon mastery, level 7. Greatsword mastery, level 4. Firearm mastery, level 1. Buffs, physical enhancement, quick attack, precision, studious, pilot, long-distance running, sword dance. The restricted section had taught him many spells. He had seen Fiendfire there, but after thinking it over, realized even among the dark arts it was too difficult to control. He gave up learning it in his first year. He'd heard some idiot had used Fiendfire in the room of requirement and burned the place down. He didn't plan to repeat that mistake. With the studious buff active, he could learn even more. Monday, Transfiguration class. Very good, Wick. 5 points to Slytherin. The lesson was turning animals into goblets. Tom sat on John's desk with his big, pleading eyes and stuck out his tongue. John tapped his wand and said, "Vera Verto." Tom became a goblet. Professor McGonagall praised the work and added a solid chunk to Slytherin's points hourglass. Hermione looked a little crestfallen, feeling she was falling further behind John. Only John knew he was a cheating grinder. He'd stayed up so late to fit in night walks and training that he'd unlocked a new trait: sleepless. You only needed 2 hours of sleep per day to be fully energized for the whole day. With that buff, he stopped dozing off under Snape's sullen gaze. He'd heard Snape had visited the hospital wing a few times and hoped Madame Pomfrey wasn't handing out euphoric stimulants to her patients, though that probably wasn't about him. Back in the room of requirement, sword light flashed again as John shattered target after target. He finished the session with a wand flick at 7 o'clock toward a remaining target. Reducto. A white jet of light shot from the wand's tip and blew the target apart. Where at first it had only caused small explosions, now it produced a real blast. After training, he rested a while, preparing to leave. Tomorrow was the Halloween feast, and he wanted to be in good shape. In 2 days, his 2-month punishment in the trophy room would end. Slytherin's common room was in the dungeons. He had to go from the 8th floor down to the 1st. Luckily, Hogwarts had no shortage of shortcuts. On the 1st floor corridor, he found the Bloody Baron waiting. The taciturn Slytherin ghost seemed to be expecting him. Chapter 14, The Great Sword and the Ghost. Mr. Baron. John dispelled his disillusionment charm as he neared the Slytherin entrance. He wasn't embarrassed to be caught on a night walk. He was curious what the Bloody Baron was doing there. The ghost stood looking out into the night, eyes thoughtful. He was terrifying in a quiet way, hollow-eyed, gaunt, with silvery bloodstains on his robe. Even Peeves trembled at the mention of his name. John could sense those stains were the mark of an old wound, and though curious about the story, he didn't want to pry. "It's you," the Baron said. The Slytherin who sneaks out. John nodded. The Baron scanned him, puzzled by the sight of a wizard carrying a greatsword. What are you out for? Practice. I feel I need to work harder to be worthy of Slytherin. Flattery never went out of style. The Baron shook his head. You are very diligent, but I think you are more like a... He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was obvious. Gryffindor. It made a strange kind of sense. The Bloody Baron had lived in the time of the four founders. His own sorrowful history involving Helena Ravenclaw and a terrible guilt-driven end had connected him, in temperament, to Godric Gryffindor, who prized swordcraft. John felt almost like a young Godric Gryffindor himself. Here he was, a Slytherin, carrying a greatsword. Merlin's beard, he muttered inwardly. Who would have thought an old house ghost would mistake him for a Gryffindor? The Baron continued more gravely. I came to tell you there are other dangerous things at night. Be careful. The Baron had been unusually talkative. John thought immediately of Professor Quirrell. The Marauder's map showed Quirrell leaving Hogwarts frequently. The Baron, uniquely able to move unseen among the castle, must have seen something and come to warn him. I understand, Mr. Baron. I'll be careful. John accepted the ghost's warning and went back to his dormitory to consult the Marauder's map. He tapped the parchment, recited the familiar line, and Hogwarts unfurled before him. Apart from professors and patrols, one name stood out. Quirrell. The professor's name was crossing the castle and slipping past Filch's patrols out the front gate. Where is he going? John wondered. The map only showed Hogwarts grounds. It couldn't display locations like the Forbidden Forest. If Quirrell wasn't staying inside the castle, only one place seemed likely. The Forbidden Forest. It sheltered many creatures, werewolves, centaurs, and pure unicorns. The Baron had warned him it was dangerous. Had he meant Voldemort? Thinking of Lord Voldemort tightened a knot of unease in John's chest. This second-generation Dark Lord wasn't as powerful or influential as the first across Europe, but he had no scruples. For his own ends, he neglected any sense of honor or shame. He wouldn't hesitate to use the killing curse even on an infant. If Voldemort was acting in the forest, John felt he had to get stronger. He didn't want to rely on vague prophecies or hope someone else would save things for him. He covered Tom's eyes with his big ears, unwilling to count on destiny. He needed to improve himself. October 31st, Charms Class, Section 13. The sweet scent of roasted pumpkin filled the corridor, and in the classroom students were paired off, listening as Professor Flitwick explained the key points of the levitation charm. John could clearly see Crabbe and Goyle swallowing nervously, and his partner was Malfoy, a literal meeting of sworn enemies. Malfoy was on edge, as if he expected John to suddenly jab his wand into his eye. Professor Flitwick stood on a makeshift booster of piled books, his tiny voice chirping out pointers. All right, don't forget that subtle wrist movement we've been practicing. Swish and flick. Remember, swish and flick. And pronouncing the incantation correctly is very important. Don't be like that Baruffio fellow. As both the head of Ravenclaw and the charms professor, Flitwick was undeniably excellent. He could break a charm down into small, digestible steps and feed them to his students until everyone understood. Rumor had it the young Flitwick had even won the dueling championship. Once Flitwick finished, the students began to practice. Wingardium Leviosa. Malfoy's wand was nearly poking John in the face, but the feather on the table remained motionless. John pretended patience and hissed, Malfoy, if you poke my hand again, I'll stick my wand in your ear. Malfoy stiffened, but pure-blood pride wouldn't let him back down to a Muggle-born, so he shot back. If you can do it, then you do it. Sorry, I actually can. John shrugged, drew his wand with a practiced flourish, and aimed at the feather. With a smooth swish and flick, he said, Wingardium Leviosa. Under everyone's gaze, the feather rose and followed John's wand, drifting precisely and gently into Professor Flitwick's hand. Excellent. Flitwick clapped, his voice squeaking with delight. Look, John has succeeded elegantly and perfectly. 10 points to Slytherin. Across the room in the Gryffindor area, Hermione, confident she could perform the charm, had been badly paired with Ron, who waved his wand wildly. Just as she was about to cast correctly, John stole the moment, the feather obediently answering his command. Hermione's face fell. Watching John control the feather so precisely made her feel sidelined, and she let herself feel the disappointment. Ron, as a result, sank into a worse mood than before. After class, in the crowded corridor, Ron complained to Harry, "No wonder everyone can't stand her. She's a nightmare." Hermione heard the remark and felt doubly wronged. She'd been trying to help Ron, not irritate him. Hurt, she left without waiting for John, weaving through the hall until she bumped into Harry. Harry, who'd begun to think better of Hermione lately, felt Ron had gone too far. "I think she heard you," he told Ron. Ron saw Hermione's sad expression, but, stubborn and proud, replied, "So what? She must have noticed she doesn't have any friends." "Ron, you shouldn't say that," Harry said sharply. Ron mumbled, shoulders hunched. "All right, actually she does have friends. John is one," and trailed off. Chapter 15, Halloween Feast and the Troll. Harry wanted to make Ron apologize to Hermione, but she didn't appear again until the next class was over. Harry didn't see Hermione all afternoon and decided to set the matter aside for the moment. On their way to the Great Hall for the Halloween feast, Harry and Ron overheard Parvati Patil whispering that Hermione had been seen crying in the girls' bathroom. Under Harry's urging, Ron felt uneasy and admitted he might have been wrong. "Let's find her and apologize later," he said. They agreed to do so after the feast. The Great Hall dazzled as they entered. Halloween decorations hung everywhere. Bats fluttered on the walls and ceiling, clusters of dark shapes circling like low clouds. Pumpkins with flickering candles sat on the tables, and golden plates held a dazzling spread of food. John grabbed a skin-on potato and threw it at the back of Neville's head. "Neville, where's Hermione?" Neville rubbed his head, blinked, and then remembered. "I heard Parvati say Hermione was crying in the girls' bathroom and wouldn't let anyone comfort her." "Is that so? I should go find her. She shouldn't miss a feast like this." John felt a vague unease. He remembered the words of the Bloody Baron and had the odd sense that something was about to happen. A small notification pulsed in his thoughts, as if from a game. Ding, found Hermione and defeated the troll, gained any point +1, buff. Troll Slayer. Increased damage against large creatures. John blinked and flinched. He remembered the rumor that a troll had escaped during the Halloween festivities. He didn't think Hermione could deal with a 12-foot-tall troll on her own. Without hesitation, he stood and left his seat. Dumbledore, savoring a pumpkin tart, watched him go with contemplative eyes behind half-moon spectacles. Not long after John left, Professor Quirrell rushed into the hall, a terrible look on his face. Everyone fell silent as he ran to a chair near Dumbledore, leaned on it, and gasped out, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you should know." Before he could say more, Quirrell collapsed onto the floor. Chaos erupted in the Great Hall. Dumbledore quickly calmed the students and ordered the prefects to lead everyone back to their houses. Harry and Ron followed the line out. Ron muttered that Peeves must have let the troll loose, but Harry's thoughts went elsewhere. "Oh no, Hermione doesn't know about the troll yet," he said. Ron bit his lip, glanced at his prefect brother Percy, and whispered, "Okay, let's make sure Percy doesn't see us." The two crouched low and slipped away from the crowd. As they moved, Harry noticed Professor Snape heading toward the 4th floor. The sight planted a seed of suspicion in his mind. 1st floor, girls' lavatory. Hermione had been crying quietly in a cubicle. She was brilliant and capable, but she was still only a girl, and being shunned had hurt her. After some time, she'd washed her face and calmed herself. "John won't hate me," she told her reflection. A knock sounded at the door. Hermione started, voice trembling. "Who is it?" "Hermione, are you all right?" It was John. He had found the girl's lavatory, and relieved to hear she was inside, was about to ask her to open up when a foul stench hit him. It was like a combination of the Weasley twins' dung bombs and an unclean public loo, awful enough to make him reel. A colossal figure moved in the shadows and heavy footsteps approached. John drew back the door and hissed into the cubicle. "Hermione, hide! Don't open the door." He stared at the troll. Trolls weren't clever, but they were terrifyingly strong. The creature before him was 12 feet tall, skin like rough granite, a small, rounded head, and a massive wooden club clutched in one hand. John took a steadying breath. He'd never faced anything this big before. The troll scratched its thick head, puzzled by John, but appearance didn't mean harmless. It was dangerous enough to break bones with a single swing. John shifted his weight, grinning with a dangerous edge. He flicked his wrist and brought his wand to hand. Reducto. A jet of white light struck the troll. It howled and stumbled back, a fist-sized dent appearing in its skin. The blow only enraged it. With a roar, the troll swung its club at John. He rolled aside as the club crashed through the girl's bathroom door, splintering it to pieces. "Ah!" Hermione screamed. The troll turned toward the sound, but John's next spell caught it first. He shouted and ran backwards, the troll pursuing, and he fought and retreated, carefully luring the creature away from the cubicles. Harry and Ron burst into the lavatory, and their hearts sank at the sight of the shattered door. "Hermione!" they cried. Section 14. They ran to the girl's bathroom and found Hermione huddled in a corner. "It didn't go in here," she whispered. Relief barely had time to register when Hermione's voice trembled with panic. John led the troll away. "We have to go. Quick!" Harry and Ron didn't argue. Gryffindors didn't lack courage when a friend was in danger. They followed the direction Hermione pointed. John had already calculated the distance. The troll was far enough from the bathroom not to endanger Hermione. He rolled forward to dodge the club whistling past him and cast without hesitation Wingardium Leviosa. Shards of the broken wall, torn loose by the troll's club, floated up. Guided by John's wand, they slammed into the creature's face. The troll howled and recoiled. John seized the opening, ripped a sword from a nearby suit of armor, and midair swung at the arm holding the club. Silver light flashed, blood spattered in the moonlight, the motion oddly graceful despite the violence. The blow didn't lop the arm off, but it drove the troll into such pain he dropped the club, and the pain only made him wilder. His attacks, as brutish as his brain, became easier to predict the angrier he got. "Reducto," John said, and a blast struck the troll's forehead. He collapsed instantly. The sword in John's hand swung down, shearing off fingers so the club slipped free. Before it hit the floor, John sent the club up with the levitation charm and drove it into the troll, sending him flying into a ruined suit of armor. For a moment, the monster lay still. John stepped forward to make sure it was finished. Harry and Ron caught up, and the three of them stared at the devastation. Blood on the walls, a sword stuck in the ceiling, a troll sprawled among broken armor. "John, are you all right?" Harry called. At that instant, the troll, which they'd assumed dead, opened one red eye. With its remaining left hand, it lashed toward John. The three of them gasped. John swung the sword instinctively, and the blade struck the hand with a clang, sailing from his grip and embedding itself in the ceiling. His right hand tingled, numb from the blow, and he was suddenly disarmed. But he still had his wand. Like a coiled snake, it shot into the troll's eye before the creature could lurch up. John's face was stone cold as he pronounced the final spell. Reducto. A reducto detonating inside the skull did what the name promised. The troll's head burst in a grisly spray. The sight was so ghastly that the trio turned green and promptly vomited. A moment later, Professor McGonagall arrived, fury written across her usually austere face. "How dare you? What on earth do you think you are doing?" Harry had never seen her so angry. Relief and surprise flashed across her features, but anger dominated. Her gaze swept the three of them, and her voice iced over. "Why were you not in your dormitories?" Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked guilty. Ron felt especially aggrieved. He'd been certain he deserved at least 50 points for Gryffindor. But McGonagall's expression made it clear they were lucky not to lose more. Hermione stepped forward, without hesitation, and for the first time lying to a professor. "Please don't take points, Professor McGonagall," she said. "We were looking for me. I came because I thought I could handle a troll on my own. I've read about them. If you hadn't found me, I would have been killed. John led the troll away, and Harry and Ron saved me." Harry and Ron exchanged startled looks. Hermione's willingness to shoulder responsibility warmed them. Even Ron put aside his grievances. McGonagall was pleased in a way. Gryffindor prized courage and loyalty. But she wasn't a fool. She looked at the carnage. Severed fingers, blood spattered across the corridor, a sword embedded in the ceiling. When her eyes fell on John, lying where he had been, her face tightened. "Mr. Wick, do you have anything to say?" John cleared his throat. The intensity of her stare made honesty seem the wisest course. "Cough. Professor, all right, I did it." McGonagall was incredulous. Even an adult Auror would find taking down a troll difficult without special measures. For a first year to have done it seemed impossible. "Good heavens," she muttered. "A wizard so young. I should not have to tell you, Mr. Wick, how reckless this is." She addressed Hermione. "Miss Granger, because of this, Gryffindor will lose 5 points. If you are not hurt, go back to the Gryffindor common room. The students are still enjoying the Halloween feast." Hermione bowed her head and left. Harry and Ron remained on edge, but McGonagall did not punish them. In fact, each was awarded 5 points for putting themselves at risk for a friend, an award they felt they didn't deserve since John had done most of the work. They were sent back to their house, and the corridor was left to the professors. Professor Snape and Professor Quirrell arrived shortly after and stood in stunned silence at the scene. Quirrell, especially, looked pale. He'd been the one who had released the troll. He knew how dangerous such a creature was to first years. That it was dead, and dead so horribly, made Quirrell look at John with something like hungry interest. The idea of such a particularly promising young wizard did not escape him, or the dark presence on his head. Snape's voice was acid and assessing. "Mr. Wick, it appears you think rather highly of yourself." Then, in a move that surprised everyone, he awarded points, 20, to Slytherin for the spectacle and skill on display. John's face briefly lit at the unexpected gain. Snape's tone turned more severe. "Because of your recklessness, Mr. Wick, you will be assigned to patrol the Forbidden Forest for a time this school year." John had been half preparing to be sent to the forest, if only because Quirrell often had business there, but the punishment still soured him. The Forbidden Forest wasn't a pleasant walk, especially now that he knew more about why Quirrell went there. Still, he had little choice. McGonagall had to inform Dumbledore, and the decision stood. "Just left the trophy room, and now I have to go to the Forbidden Forest," he muttered as he was escorted away. He didn't regret the loss of freedom. The 20 points felt like a net gain. He planned to save them for when they might matter, perhaps during some bottleneck in his schoolwork. Part of him already ranked future studies, a clumency before fiendfire. He didn't relish the thought of having his mind pried open by some legilimens. November 1st, word spread like wildfire. A troll had been killed by a first year. John's reputation rose sharply in Slytherin. Even Draco Malfoy, usually cold and aloof, drifted over, curiosity written on his face. "Did you really kill a troll?" he asked, too interested to be proud. John, eating bread and drinking water, he wasn't in the mood for milk or tomato juice, looked at Malfoy with bored amusement. "Do you want the details? I can describe the whole thing." Malfoy's imagination carried him to the corridor scene, Filch cursing while scrubbing blood from the walls. The pale milk at Malfoy's throat curdled. He went a little green. "No, that's all right," he stammered and retreated. After that, John's status in Slytherin rose. Older students were wary of crossing him. Peers who'd been arrogant now kept their distance. He moved seats with an air of disdain, and almost immediately, Harry, Ron, and Hermione appeared. "John, there's a Quidditch match tomorrow. Are you coming?" the trio asked, now on friendlier terms. Harry remembered where he'd heard the name Wick before. Dudley Dursley had been terrified of him. John didn't mind watching a match. "I'll go," he said, "but let me make my allegiance clear. I'll be cheering for Slytherin." Harry and Ron laughed awkwardly. They'd almost forgotten John was in Slytherin. Hermione, though, looked worried. "They're sending first years into the Forbidden Forest," she fretted. "There are werewolves there. I can't believe the school would have a first-year patrol the forest." John only shrugged. He had his own reasons to be cautious about what lurked in the trees, but for now, the attention and the points felt like a small victory. She was furious when she said it. The fact that John had saved her, and yet he was still being punished, made her blood boil. Harry felt even colder towards Snape after he'd gone to fetch Quidditch Through the Ages and, by chance, noticed some peculiar bite marks on the fourth-floor corridor. Whatever it was, it only made Snape seem more despicable to him. That day, Slytherin and Gryffindor didn't share lessons. As John was leaving, Malfoy couldn't help but toss out a question. "Wick, are you going to cheer for Slytherin at tomorrow's match?" In Malfoy's mind, John might as well be Gryffindor. He could easily end up rooting for Potter. John smiled, looked at him, and answered, "Of course, for eternal glory." Malfoy blinked and repeated it under his breath. For eternal glory. The phrase shifted something in him. Maybe John wasn't so clearly Gryffindor after all. Slytherin did prize glory. That night, John carried a lantern and followed Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid's huge shape was oddly comforting. His crossbow, with its cold metal gleam, made John think twice about anything that might try to cross them. They hadn't gone far when a keening reached them. Hagrid's face tightened. That's the sound of a unicorn. The image of a white, spiral-horned horse, pure and protected, filled John's head. Hagrid moved fast for his size. Accustomed to the hills, he ran without breaking stride. John, fit but not used to Hagrid's pace, had to push himself to keep up. They found the unicorn at a pool in a small glade, beautiful, wailing, and grievously wounded. Silver-white blood dripped from the wound like mercury. "Careful," Hagrid warned, fingers tight around the crossbow. If something attacked, he wouldn't hesitate to fire. They approached slowly. Hagrid sank to his knees and tried to help, but whatever had done this had done it badly. "No one harms a unicorn," he murmured, eyes full of grief. "Not unless they don't value their own lives." John felt his stomach drop. The Forbidden Forest creatures didn't prey on unicorns. Someone had done this on purpose. Quirrell entered John's thoughts. The suspicious late-night outings, the odd behavior, and the connection felt ugly and plausible. There was nothing they could do for the creature now. They buried it with solemn hands, and Hagrid was a heavy silence all the way back to his hut. Inside, John forced himself to cheer Hagrid up, rock cakes, clumsy jokes, and slowly the giant's mood eased. "That wasn't an ordinary attack," Hagrid said at last. "We needs to make sure it don't happen again." John agreed. He felt danger pressing nearer. After feeding Fang, he didn't go straight to the Slytherin common room. Instead, he slipped into the library, found his way into the restricted section, and dug out charms and treatises on occlumency. He spent a night in the room of requirement, working through exercises until, exhausted and satisfied, he thought he'd reached the first meaningful level of control in what he was trying to learn. On match day, the Great Hall buzzed with excitement. John was popping toast into his mouth when he saw Hermione fussing over Harry like an older sister. Harry refused food. He was jittery, more afraid of failing in front of everyone than of falling off his broom. John sipped water and offered, "Don't be nervous. It'd be worse to catch the snitch and not have the strength to hold it, or get knocked out by a bludger and end up in the hospital wing." Harry chewed and nodded. Seamus Finnegan bounded over, grinning. "John, are you coming to watch? We could use you to see how we fix Slytherin." John shrugged. "I'm a Slytherin." Seamus immediately regretted it. "Right, sorry, didn't mean." "Don't worry," John said easily. Malfoy arrived with Crabbe and Goyle in tow and sniffed at the Gryffindor table. "Wick, I'll show you to the Quidditch pitch. Bet you don't even know where it is." He strutted, as if offering charity. John thought, why not? If he was going to cheer for Slytherin, he might as well go with them. When Malfoy left with John, Ron gaped. "Did you see that?" Malfoy invited John. Seamus flung his hands up. He must have been confounded. Hermione, frowning at their wild conjectures, said quietly, "John's done a lot for Slytherin already. He's nearly earned them 200 points. They all stared at that. Beaten up Malfoy at the start of term, added 200 points. Odd, but true in their world. The Quidditch pitch was heaving. John almost couldn't squeeze through the crowd until Crabbe and Goyle shoved them to a decent vantage. The stands were a living split of red and gold on one side and green on the other. The noise was almost physical. Madam Hooch blew on her whistle. Lee Jordan started commentating from Gryffindor's box, and Professor McGonagall, a passionate fan, sat beside him. Whenever Gryffindor scored, Lee almost leaped from his seat. When Slytherin scored, he moved on. John couldn't help grumbling at the one-sidedness, but no one else seemed bothered. Hagrid elbowed his way into the Gryffindor section, dwarfed by teenagers, but grinning like a child. Ron and Hermione looked tiny next to him. The match was tense and messy. Foul calls shouted from the stands again and again. Then Harry's broom started bucking violently, like he'd been hit by a bad hex. John glanced at Malfoy. The Slytherin was watching with glee. John thought, he doesn't have the skill for that. Could he have done something? The broom steadied, and the drama kept unfolding. At one point, a man in the row ahead of John rose so suddenly that his robes flared up and in the scramble, John swung and accidentally elbowed the man behind him, Quirrell, hard in the face. Quirrell went backward against his seat and lay still, dazed. Harry found the snitch moments later. He dove, rose, and people watched him bring it to his mouth and then spit it out. Lee Jordan's voice cracked with excitement as he announced the catch. Gryffindor had won, 170 to 60. The Slytherin supporters groaned. John felt a flicker of disappointment. We could have used a better seeker, he thought. Malfoy, red-faced, already vowed to become Slytherin's seeker and crush Potter next time. John couldn't shake his suspicion about the broom's behavior, but he was convinced Snape had nothing to do with it. Snape, if anything, was a mess of fiercely private loyalties. He wouldn't harm Lily's child. There was a complicated softness under all that harshness. John suspected, for all Snape's nastiness, he had reasons nobody else knew. While people filed out, voices carried to John from nearby. Forget that big dog. Forget what it's guarding. This is between Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. Hagrid muttered, clearly irritated. Then Harry's questioning voice rose. John, who had just come up to the entrance after the match, paused in the doorway and considered stepping into whatever conversation had started. Section 16. He glanced at the dog food he'd brought. He could wait, but Greedy Fang probably couldn't. He could already hear the dog panting. How had this enormous beast learned to obey Hagrid just for the promise of food? John knocked and opened the door to find Hagrid looking annoyed and a bit embarrassed. The three little ones were inside with him, and rock cakes sat on the table. John hoped Hermione's dentist father could do something about their poor teeth. Chapter 18. Speculation and Quirrell. I swear, Hagrid definitely knows something, Harry said after they left Hagrid's hut. John set the dog food down and led the three creatures away. Hermione and Ron agreed. Hagrid was hiding something. Their only lead was the name Nicholas Flamel. Harry, determined to expose Snape if possible, frowned. I feel like I've seen that name before, but I can't place it. John, sharper with facts than Harry, shrugged. Not one I remember. Check the library. If he's not in the records, then maybe he doesn't exist. Hermione brightened at the suggestion. Let's go, then. If we can find something before Christmas, it would be best. Hearing Christmas made Harry's expression fall. He didn't want to go back to the Dursleys, where he'd be shoved into a cupboard again and bullied by Dudley. Ron and Hermione sympathized. It was hard for them to imagine such relatives. Hermione asked John if he planned to go home for the holidays. John shook his head. No, he said. I'll be catching up on my studies. I can't use magic at home. That studious resolve made Harry and Ron wince. Hermione felt pressured to match it or face questions from her father about not working hard enough. The four split up on the 5th floor. John had no plans to spend time in the library that night. His priority was occlumency. He went to the room of requirement on the 8th floor and completed a day of training. By the time he came out, it was dark. He decided to head to the kitchens for dinner. On the way, he nearly ran into someone he would rather have avoided. John Wick. Good evening, Professor Quirrell stammered, as if the meeting had been a surprise. John's hand slipped to his wand reflexively, and he exercised occlumency on the professor's intruding thoughts. He gave a polite smile. Good evening, Professor. After seeing what John had done against the troll, Voldemort had noticed him as a potential recruit. Pure-blood pedigree didn't matter to Voldemort when he saw use in someone. He hoped to groom John into a covert ally at Hogwarts and had sent Quirrell to make contact. Quirrell, quick to flatter, tried an angle he thought would appeal. Are you studying? You're very diligent. John saw through the ploy but played along. Been so busy I forgot to eat. If that's all, I'm off to dinner. He didn't want to linger. He had no wish for Voldemort to materialize from somewhere. Quirrell, however, pressed on, smiling and stammering. Really studious. Perhaps you'd be interested in the restricted section. John's stride slowed. The restricted section. That would be useful. Quirrell's disdainful, knowing look told John everything he needed to know. The invitation was bait. Wizards hungry for knowledge were easy to tempt with forbidden books. Quirrell, for his part, believed the fastest way to produce useful followers was to lead bright students into the dark arts a little at a time. But John wasn't a child to be easily corrupted. Quirrell offered, then, the sort of favor a professor might. Come to my office on Monday, and I'll give you a pass to the restricted section." "Really? I've wanted to see it for ages," John admitted, putting on the eager face Quirrell wanted. Quirrell suggested a few titles with a conspiratorial air, things like 16th century dark arts, the curse of magic, 19th century curses, and argued that understanding dark magic was part of learning defense. John smiled inwardly. He wasn't buying the recruiting pitch. Still, a signed note meant easier access to hard-to-find knowledge, and John had no intention of letting Quirrell dictate his studies. Monday, John collected the professor's signed note. Quirrell passed along those same book suggestions in a voice meant to tempt. John raised an eyebrow, amused by the attempt, and went to the library. He spotted the trio searching for Nicholas Flamel, but didn't interrupt them. After showing the note to Madame Pince, he was allowed into the restricted section. The books there were dense and demanding, even for someone in studious mode. He muttered to himself, "Not enough background yet. The foundations are weak." Then he found a book called Goblin Forging. His heart leapt. The Sword of Gryffindor had been commissioned by Godric Gryffindor and forged by goblins. His fighting style was similar to Gryffindor's, but his weapons were inferior. Facing the troll with makeshift, medieval-style weapons had been awkward. Magical creatures often had astonishing defenses. Dragon scales, for example, resist magic in a way ordinary steel could not match. A properly crafted magical weapon would help immensely. Maybe he could have one forged himself. He dove into Goblin Forging, a translation of an Egyptian wizard's work. It was tough going, but exciting. Over the next days, he also borrowed basic runes guidance. As he read, the goblin techniques began to make sense. That evening, book tucked away, he prepared for his nightly patrol in the Forbidden Forest. His punishment hadn't been lifted yet. He still had to patrol with Hagrid. When he arrived at the hut, Fang bounded over and sniffed him all over. Hagrid chuckled. "Fang really likes you. Are you sure he's not just hungry?" John asked, watching Fang paw at his pockets with obvious interest in the sandwiches. Chapter 19. Night Demon and Giant Spider. Several days had passed since the unicorn's death. Hagrid had been talking to the forest creatures and, from the centaurs, learned of an evil presence lingering at the forest's edge. Tonight, they were to patrol the outskirts. John had adjusted to Hagrid's pace, with Fang running ahead. The dog was enormous, but timid, more jumpy than even Tom, as Hagrid liked to say. Partway through the patrol, a spider the size of a human head skittered into view. John's hand went to his wand. Reducto came to mind. "What a huge spider," he breathed. "Wait, this is one of Aragog's descendants," Hagrid called, halting John. Under John's uneasy gaze, Hagrid seemed to be communicating with the creature. "Aragog's looking for me." Aragog had been Hagrid's friend, raised by him and later released into the forest when Hagrid ran into trouble. John nodded without much reaction. Hagrid's easy manner about dangerous things still astonished him. If Ron had been here, he might have fainted. They followed the spider to a cave. Before they entered, John saw many spiders, but inside the cavern, his skin prickled with a cold that traveled down his spine. The place teemed with spiders, countless bodies, some as large as human heads, small compared to others. There were dozens of spiders as tall as people, looming in the gloom, their eyes catching the lantern light. John felt gooseflesh rise all over him. Section 17. Gulp Hagrid. Are you sure they're friendly? John swallowed and edged closer to Hagrid. The giant felt reassuring, but only when they were outside. This was a spider's lair. "Don't worry," Hagrid said. "These are Aragog's children. They won't hurt you." Hagrid sounded certain, but John wasn't convinced. The spiders were practically salivating. His left hand tightened on his wand. If any of them came too close, he swore he'd blast them with Reducto. At the back of the cavern, a gray spider the size of a car lay sprawled. Aragog himself, an old acromantula with cataract-clouded eyes. "Hagrid," Aragog greeted him, delighted. He restrained his restless brood and spoke to Hagrid of the forest. "Something's come in. It's very evil. It's been hunting unicorns." Hagrid had asked Aragog to watch for signs, and Aragog had spread his offspring through the Forbidden Forest. "He's very strong," Aragog went on. "Many of my children have been killed. He's like a wandering spirit, appears, disappears, unpredictable." Acromantulas eat humans, and while Aragog kept his own brood from attacking Hagrid, they were not harmless. The thing in the forest had single-handedly slain several of Aragog's offspring, strong enough to match an Auror. Aragog had seen this stranger come and go, but had not been able to stop him. Hagrid's face darkened. John's fear hardened into certainty. The creature was after unicorn blood. Unicorn blood is cursed, but it can keep someone alive on a single breath. "I understand, Aragog," Hagrid said. As they prepared to leave, the surrounding acromantulas began to converge. "Aragog?" Hagrid looked at his old friend, puzzled. Aragog apologized. "Sorry, Hagrid. I told my children not to hurt you, but they don't know how to restrain themselves around others." "Oh no." Hagrid's face fell. Bringing John had been a mistake. "John, let's go!" Hagrid scooped John up and, with the force of a human truck, barreled through the nearest spiders. Those that blocked their path were hurled aside, but the brood, sensing rare prey, didn't let go. John drew his wand and fired at an advancing acromantula. Reducto! A white beam struck the spider, knocking it backward and wounding it, though not killing it. "Beautiful charms," Hagrid praised. Don't be fooled by his bulk. Hagrid moved with surprising agility. With John cradled in his arms, he didn't have to dodge. He could concentrate on attacking. John sent a line of fire from his wand. Incendio! Flames engulfed the nearest spiders. Wingardium Leviosa! A fallen log was lifted and hurled into a swarm. Under the relentless assault, John's magic began to ebb. He grabbed a stone and flung it. A pinging sensation ran through him. Ding! Magic power upgraded successfully. Current magic power, level 3. Warmth flowed through John and his magic restored. A car-sized acromantula charged from the front. John pointed his wand and unleashed Reducto again. This time the white light was far bigger. What had once fit in a tangerine-sized beam was now much larger. When it struck, the great spider's carapace spidered with cracks and shattered into pieces. His power had more than doubled. Turning, he blasted at the spiders pursuing them, and together with Hagrid they broke free of the nest. Outside, catching their breath, Hagrid looked contrite. "I'm sorry, John. I thought Aragog still had them under control." Aragog had once commanded them, but age had stripped him of authority. The younger spiders no longer obeyed. "It's all right, Hagrid. Just don't bring other people there." John felt lucky. Without Hagrid's help, he would likely have become a meal. They spent a while longer patrolling the Forbidden Forest, then ended for the day. Back at Hagrid's hut, John poured a large bowl of food for Fang, who had run himself ragged in the cave. After bidding Hagrid farewell, John returned to Hogwarts and checked the Marauders map. Professor Quirrell was not in his office. Ding! Gained buff, Night Demon. Night Demon. Blends into darkness, increases stealth and perception, increases damage from stealth attacks. 100 hours of wandering at night logged. John switched off his wand light, blinked twice, and let his eyes adapt. The dark corridor brightened for him, not as clear as daylight, but enough to read in total darkness. This is going to be useful, he thought. With Night Demon, he could move through shadows nearly undetected, even without a disillusionment charm. Combine them, and he could approach the effect of an invisibility cloak. Over the next days, John accidentally met Quirrell more than once. The ordinarily absent-minded professor was unfailingly attentive to John in private, dropping hints that John could come to him with any problem and suggesting he had a substantial command of the dark arts. John played the ignorant bookworm, but he knew power when he saw it. Dark arts, like Fiendfire, were devastatingly potent. Finally, he asked Quirrell to teach him Fiendfire. Quirrell readily accepted. Quirrell himself admitted he wasn't entirely proficient, but he had the second-generation Dark Lord backing him, Voldemort's presence, and between Quirrell's instruction and the Dark Lord's guidance, John learned the spell. He treated it with respect. Fiendfire was notoriously uncontrollable. Once ignited, it could devour nearly anything and was extremely hard to put out. Quirrell also stopped pretending. He had been subtle before. Now he spoke openly of matters concerning the Dark Lord. John understood what he meant, and when necessary, played along, offering the occasional nod of approval to avoid questions. Quirrell's attention grated, but it was a small price for what John was learning. December crept in. In potions, under Snape's gloomy gaze, the class chattered about Christmas plans. The Weasleys weren't going home. At the last minute, they'd gone to Romania to visit Charlie, who worked with dragons. John watched the Weasley twins enchant snowballs to chase Quirrell's head and felt a quiet thrill. Quirrell no longer pretended around John, but in front of students he still played the meek, put-upon professor, forced smiles and a facade of weakness, all while quietly plotting how to deal with Fred and George later. Outside, a cold wind lashed the windows. Inside the Great Hall, a roaring fire and 12 towering Christmas trees made the castle look festive. John rubbed his hands and watched his breath fog the glass. He and Harry watched Malfoy and Harry exchange the usual barbs before the holidays. John quipped, "They say children bully the people they like. Malfoy must have a crush." Hagrid lumbered down the corridor, dragging a fear tree for the hall. Ron bristled when Malfoy made a remark about his family, and Snape, apparently waiting for the chance, appeared and unhesitatingly docked 5 points from Gryffindor, despite Hagrid's protests. Malfoy departed, smugly scattering needles. "I'm going to teach him a lesson, just like John taught him one," Ron growled. He wished he could punch Malfoy himself. Harry agreed. Malfoy and Snape ranked high on both of their dislike lists. Hagrid, however, poured cold water on their plans. "That'll be tough. John's the best fighting wizard I've ever seen. Come on, let's go to the Great Hall and see. John, you come too." John wanted to see the Christmas decorations as well. The Great Hall was a winter wonderland thanks to McGonagall and Flitwick. Garlands, holly and mistletoe, trees hung with icicles and candlelight. Hagrid had just delivered the final tree. Proud, he asked, "How many days till the holidays?" "Only one. That reminds me, we've got half an hour. We could go to the library," Hermione said. She hadn't forgotten Nicholas Flamel and invited John along. "John, want to come?" "Sure," John said. He had nothing else pressing and was curious. Hagrid teased, "Still studying even though it's nearly the holidays? You're too diligent." The trio headed to the library. Harry interjected, "We're not studying exactly. We're trying to find out who Nicholas Flamel is." "Haven't I told you? What that big dog's guarding has nothing to do with you?" Hagrid said, alarmed. He tried to dissuade them, but Gryffindor's trouble-prone trio only grew more determined. They scoured shelves and cross-references, Hermione compiling lists and indexing tomes to make the search easier. By dinner, they'd made little progress. Hermione refused to give up and told them to keep looking over the holidays and owl anything they found to her. The holidays arrived. John ate turkey, large, toothsome, but essentially just a bigger chicken, and the urge to wrap a slice in flatbread and call it a sandwich made him smile. His owl, Basil, had already flown off, presumably to collect parcels from his parents. "This owl delivery business is something else," John mused. "If I set up an owl courier service, I'd make a fortune." He didn't know what his parents might send. He only hoped that old Mr. Wick wouldn't send a mouse or a black widow. Section 18. During the holidays, John tried playing wizard's chess. The rules weren't much different from ordinary chess, but the pieces were far more dramatic. He chuckled as Ron's knight shattered his queen and, relieved, watched Harry lose 18 times in a row. Snow began to fall outside, but John didn't slack off with his training. As his magic leveled up, so did the strength of his charms. It was simple enough to understand. Magic was like water in a tap. The more inside, the stronger the flow. Before, he'd had too little. Now that he'd reached level 3, his charms were noticeably more powerful. That opened the way to more offensive spells, but the first charm he learned was defensive. Protego, he practiced. The shield charm could repel attacks and cancel many assaults. Practical, reliable. Coming out of the room of requirement, John returned to his dormitory. He woke early the next morning to find Basil already seated by his bed with gifts. The first, from Mrs. Wick, turned out to be warm, hand-knitted gloves. The second, from his father, Watson Wick, was wrapped in a small cubical box that rattled like it might contain a mouse. Inside was a bottle of hot sauce. John blinked at the label. Lao Gan Ma? Cold knowledge. Lao Gan Ma was founded in 1984. There was also a letter from his father explaining that, knowing his son's affection for food from that mysterious Eastern country, he'd used every connection to procure a bottle. John opened it eagerly, scooped a bit up with a fork, and tasted. The familiar flavors, after 11 years, burst across his tongue. He nearly cried. Everything else, Hagrid's gift, Hermione's, suddenly felt less important. In the Great Hall, Harry peered curiously at the odd bottle. "What's that?" "Smells weird." Chili sauce, John said. You can try it. He passed the bottle around. A spoonful of Lao Gan Ma could be added to almost anything. Ron, wrapped in a dark purple hand-knit sweater, tasted it and frowned. The flavor that bloomed on his palate was foreign and complex. Strange, spicy, and odd, he said, but then he dunked a chicken leg into it and chewed. His face brightened as a new world opened up. Harry, watching Ron, tasted it too, and like Ron, found it oddly addictive. Ron gave John some fudge in return. It was rich and sweet. John opened the chocolate frog Hermione had given him. The frog nearly jumped out of his hands, and a wizard card slid free. It was Dumbledore's. John skimmed the card. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, widely regarded as the greatest wizard of his time. The card listed his famous deeds: defeating Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses of dragon's blood, his alchemical work with Nicholas Flamel, and a few lighter notes. Dumbledore enjoyed chamber music and 10-pin bowling. John's eyes lingered on Nicholas Flamel. Alchemy, he murmured, rubbing his chin. He remembered reading of an incredible item in alchemical records, the Philosopher's Stone. Immortality was sought everywhere, and the stone promised something close enough. If he could get a Philosopher's Stone, it would help enormously with refining things. Maybe, he thought, he could start studying alchemy and speed up mastering goblin forging. It might even be in the restricted section of the library. On impulse, he cast a disillusionment charm over himself and left the room of requirement, heading for the 5th-floor library. He pulled out the Marauders map to make sure he wouldn't run into anyone. "Harry's out?" he muttered when he saw Harry leave the Gryffindor Tower, apparently on a nighttime stroll, heading the same way. At the restricted section's door, John didn't see Harry at first. Then the bolt slid back and the door opened by itself. The answer came to him: the invisibility cloak. He slipped through the door before it closed, watching Harry take off his cloak inside. For a moment, John foolishly didn't reveal himself. Instead, he hid and watched as Harry explored, lamp swaying, while he searched the shelves for any trace of Nicholas Flamel. Book whispers seemed to drift through the aisles. Whether real or imagined, Harry's nerves were taut. Harry set the lamp on the floor and peered along the lowest shelves. His hand closed around a large black and silver book. Without thinking, he tugged it free. "Stop!" John wanted to shout, but it was too late. The book screamed when Harry opened it, a thin, piercing wail that made his ears sting. He slammed the cover shut, but the cry didn't stop. In panic, he backed away, knocking the lamp over. He shoved the book back on the shelf, flung on the cloak, and ran. Filch, roused by the noise, came bustling toward the commotion, filth and fury in his eyes. Harry darted beneath Filch's outstretched arms and fled blindly. Without his lamp, he became hopelessly lost, finally stopping in front of a tall suit of armor and listening to Filch's voice fade. Snape's footsteps joined Filch's around the corner. Harry crept, pressed against a wall, and squeezed into an open door to hide. He leaned there, breathing hard, then took the cloak off. Just as he thought he was safe, the half-open wooden door in front of him swung inward. He hadn't seen anyone enter. The room felt haunted. His hair prickled. Then someone touched his shoulder. He started to scream, but a hand covered his mouth. "Shh! You'll get us points deducted." A voice. "John?" Harry recognized the voice and turned. John had impossibly appeared out of nowhere. He immediately regretted his earlier mischief. He'd been too playful, and now Snape and Filch had been alerted to the fact someone had been prowling the library. "That voice, was that you? How did you do it? Do you have an invisibility cloak too?" Harry rattled off questions, astonished. John's head ached from Harry's amazement, so he changed the subject. "Why don't we look around in here? I haven't been in this room before." Harry, still edge of breath and wide-eyed, nodded. The room looked like an abandoned classroom, desks and chairs piled along the walls and shadowed corners. An overturned wastebasket lay on its side. Against the wall opposite them stood a very imposing mirror, tall enough to nearly reach the ceiling, framed in ornate gold and supported by clawed feet. Across the top there was a line of letters, and John read it aloud. "Erised straeroit ub cafroit on wosi." A strange mirror, indeed. Harry, as brave as any Gryffindor, stepped forward without hesitation, but when he stood before it, his bravado vanished. His breathing quickened, and his face drained of color. "What's wrong?" John asked. Harry stared into the glass, voice small. There are a lot of people in the mirror, at least a dozen, and they're all behind me. Chapter 22. Dumbledore and the Agreement. Harry's words made John pause. He leaned in toward the mirror. There was nothing at first. Then, startlingly, a table piled with Chinese delicacies appeared beside Harry's reflection. John rubbed his eyes and looked again. Harry in the mirror was already tucking in. Not only that, but the John in the glass, older in ornate wizarding robes, looked to be in his 20s, holding an elder wand and wearing the Order of Merlin, first class. A flicker of memory returned. This was the Mirror of Erised. John frowned. That mirror wasn't supposed to show up yet. Why was it here now? John, I think these are my family, Harry murmured, gazing at the glass. Behind him in the reflection stood a gentle, beautiful woman, smiling with eyes full of love. Beside her was a black-haired, bespectacled man with hair as untidy as Harry's. They all shared his green eyes. Harry stared with a fierce, hungry longing, as if he could press his hands to the glass and step through to them. John saw the way he was transfixed and, worried, pulled him away. We should leave. Filch and the others will be back. Reluctant but obedient, Harry agreed. He slipped on his invisibility cloak and started to follow John, but John only smiled faintly. I don't need it, he said. With a small, practiced wave of his wand, he vanished from sight. Harry blinked, startled. John, are you still there? Of course I am, came the quiet reply. Harry reached out almost reflexively, and his fingers met a brief, solid warmth, enough to make him say, half laughing, Careful, you almost poked my eye. John drew back, sheepish. At the edge of Harry's vision in the mirror, a silver-haired figure had appeared for a moment, and then gone. Dumbledore? John voiced softly. Suddenly it made sense. If Dumbledore had placed this mirror here, Harry should be safe while it was around. They parted at the staircase. John went straight for the restricted section and found a heavy, dust-covered volume entitled Supreme Alchemy. A short while of reading gave him a splitting headache. The subject was too deep. Like goblin forging, it required a vast foundation. He slid the book under his pillow and opened the Marauder's map. Professor Quirrell was leaving Hogwarts. John hesitated. He could have followed him, but even without Voldemort in the picture, Quirrell alone was too dangerous. He didn't yet have any killing curse, and if his identity were exposed, he'd be dead. Best to wait. The Christmas holidays stretched on. John kept returning to the library, pulling basic texts on alchemy, goblin forging, simple alchemy, an introduction to runes. He crammed theory until his head ached. One day, buried in a book on ancient alchemy, he found a section on Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel, the only known creator of the Philosopher's Stone. The memory hit him. Harry's first-year secret had been the Philosopher's Stone. That artifact could shortcut years of alchemical work and grant access to far more advanced processes. The lure of immortality flickered across his mind, but then he remembered the side effects. It could dull feeling and leave the body brittle. Immortality like that would be worse than death. Perhaps it was something he should tell Harry. The next evening in the Great Hall, Ron was grumbling. You should have woken me. I wanted to see your mum and dad. You can go tonight, Harry said eagerly. I'm going again. You've got to see it. They excitedly discussed the mirror, barely pausing to remember Nicholas Flamel. John, meanwhile, was making a sandwich, toast and turkey, when Harry mentioned, John was there too, but I didn't see his family. John set his sandwich down and said seriously, The Mirror of Erised doesn't necessarily show family. It shows what you most desire in your heart. You shouldn't get obsessed with it. What did you see? Ron asked. John smacked his lips, thinking back. A table full of food. Ron and Harry exchanged baffled looks. Food? For a studious lad like him, they had expected books or wisdom. John didn't care whether they believed him. He'd warned them. With Dumbledore's protection, even Voldemort should be kept at bay. Before long, John remembered Nicholas Flamel and fished a chocolate frog card from his pocket. He handed it to Harry. Here. Harry accepted, puzzled, and John only smiled mysteriously. Not all answers are grand revelations. Learn to observe what's around you. Harry pocketed the card and promptly forgot about it, his mind on the mirror. John, meanwhile, returned to the library under Madame Pince's watchful eye and piled alchemy books on the table. His diligence earned a passing nod from Professor McGonagall. If only he were a Gryffindor. After 2 hard hours, he'd at least constructed a basic theoretical framework. Theory, he knew, wasn't enough. He needed practice. From goblin forging, he'd taken one blunt equation to heart. Magic plus alchemy could approximate goblin smithing. But the path to success was thousands of trials. He needed a workshop. Heading to the room of requirement on the 8th floor, he asked for a place to refine things. After pacing 3 times in front of the blank tapestry, a wooden door appeared. Inside were cauldrons, shelves of empty bottles, and samples of magical creature parts. Some of the ingredients on the shelves were already run down. John made a mental list. He'd have to restock. Hagrid, who kept and bred magical creatures, was an obvious source. The next morning, John walked to Hagrid's hut and explained what he needed. Hagrid's eyes lit up. He came back out with a staggering pile of parts. "Here you go, John. What I want blast-ended scroot butts for." John nearly stumbled taking the basket. Hagrid had been producing them by the dozen for years, a messy mix of manticore and fire crab hybrids, each butt a bristling, volatile ingredient. John hefted the weight gratefully. He'd used the favor he and Hagrid had earned together. Aragog's lair had made them friends. He declined Hagrid's rock cakes and trudged back to the room of requirement with his haul. He worked so long and hard that he forgot to eat. When he finally emerged, soot smeared his nose and sleeves. As he crossed the corridor on the 5th floor, he noticed the door to the room where the mirror was kept standing slightly ajar. Harry had been inside again. John sighed. He'd warned him. Quietly, he changed course and moved toward the door. Voices drifted from within, Harry's and someone else's. John slipped into the shadow of the corridor and with a quick, practiced flick of his wand, cast a disillusionment charm. He melted into invisibility and drew closer, ready to listen. A soft, ancient voice seemed to come from the mirror itself. "You, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erised. I didn't know it was called that, sir, but I suppose you know its power now, don't you? It showed me my family." Harry found himself talking to Professor Dumbledore, who had appeared in the room as if from nowhere. Dumbledore confirmed what John had already said. The mirror shows the deepest desire of a person's heart. He used the chance to teach Harry a little, and then told him the mirror would be moved elsewhere. Harry, reluctant but obedient, slipped his invisibility cloak back on and went to bed. "Professor Dumbledore, what did you see when you looked in the mirror?" Harry asked before Dumbledore left. Dumbledore smiled, mischievous and gentle at once. "I saw myself holding a very thick pair of woolen socks." "One can never have enough socks," Harry answered, half amused. It seemed like a flippant reply, but Harry thought there was a quiet truth to it. John had seen a table piled with food. Dumbledore's answer felt like the same kind of private longing. Dumbledore watched Harry leave, then turned and spoke to the air. "Perhaps I should speak to you face to face, Mr. Wick." John knew it was foolish to try to hide from the most famous wizard of the age. He stepped out of the shadows and let the disillusionment charm drop. His figure phased into the room as if he had materialized from thin air. "Excellent disillusionment charm. It seems you've been learning quite a bit in the restricted section," Dumbledore said approvingly. John felt exposed and awkward. Caught breaking the rules by the headmaster made his stomach churn. Dumbledore laughed gently. "Don't worry, I believe Professor Quirrell initialed your note, did he not?" Dumbledore's wink was playful and disarmingly young for such an old man. John had expected no leniency, but relief made him relax. He was about to leave when Dumbledore called him back, eyes twinkling with that look of seeing into people's hearts. "Mr. Wick, what did you see in the mirror?" John's muscles tensed and he reflexively reached for a clumency, trying to control his thoughts. He answered as honestly as he could. "Food, lots of food, and myself becoming powerful." Dumbledore clapped in delight. "Applause for honesty, John. You know, Minerva has been teasing me lately, saying the Sorting Hat might be broken." Behind his half-moon spectacles, Dumbledore's eyes were deeper than they looked, his voice soft and full of meaning. "She's wrong. The hat is not broken. You would indeed be most suitable for Slytherin, there is no doubt." "Promise me, John, do not meddle with irreversible magic," Dumbledore added, the tone turning serious. "I promise, Professor," John said without hesitation. He didn't know why Dumbledore brought it up, Perhaps the headmaster suspected John had been reading dark arts texts in the restricted section. John nodded. He trusted Dumbledore did not intend to be cruel, but he still hated the idea of being found out. "You have the self-control to overcome desire," Dumbledore said kindly. "I trust you, and, as something of a reward for discovering the mirror's secret, you may yet have the opportunity to come into contact with the true Philosopher's Stone." Dumbledore's wink afterwards hinted at more than he said. John was taken aback. This old man seemed to know everything, from the restricted section to the chocolate frog wizard cards. Chapter 23, New Semester and Guidance. January 1st. The new term began, and John felt oddly indifferent to the calendar. Hermione had arrived back at Hogwarts a day before, frustrated that Harry and the others hadn't been able to track down Nicholas Flamel. "John, are you studying alchemy?" she asked when she found him in the library. John was reading a heavy volume titled Introduction to Alchemy and Mastery. Hermione, who had temporarily set aside her Flamel hunt, checked his reading list more closely and noticed he had books on runes too. Ancient runes was an elective for older students, but Hermione couldn't resist helping. That very day, she brought back a stack of runic texts, determined not to be outdone. By the next morning, however, Hermione had 2 dark circles under her eyes. Ancient runes was a brutal subject for a first year. "I swear I've seen that name before," she muttered about Flamel. "I just can't remember where." Harry, persuaded by Dumbledore to stop visiting the mirror, had begun to dream frequently of his parents' deaths at Voldemort's hands. The nightmares sharpened his focus on Nicholas Flamel. Although Harry was sure he'd seen Flamel's name somewhere, Hermione and the others slowly ran out of places to look in the library. They had to content themselves with checking during breaks. John alternated between alchemy and an easy introduction to ancient runes so he wouldn't burn out. He was steadily making progress. "Wick, why are you reading that? You planning to sell trinkets in Nocturne Alley?" Draco Malfoy asked one afternoon, the superiority in his tone tempered by curiosity. Ever since the Quidditch match, he no longer ignored John outright. "Just making a few small things," John replied. "Alchemy is complicated. You know about the Gryffindor sword?" Malfoy blinked. "What's that?" "A legendary silver sword made by goblins for Godric Gryffindor," John said. "Only a true Gryffindor can draw it, but that's not what's important. The sorting hat is an alchemical artifact, too." John had worked hard. He'd sacrificed some of his training time to study and finally activated his runes skill. With runes unlocked, he had the basics required for more complex crafting. Alchemy activation would allow him to attempt goblin forging. He still needed components. Some of the materials he'd obtained from Hagrid, like bits of blast-ended scroot, were nearly used up, and alchemy itself was proving difficult to trigger. Malfoy, used to seeing magical objects in his family's home, assumed John came from a poor Muggle family who had to make do. He didn't understand the nuances. He only saw a boy who might be trying to make money. That evening, they had astronomy in the tower, learning the positions of Sagittarius from Professor Aurora Sinistra. After classes, John met Professor Quirrell and found a single note in his hand, Defense Against the Dark Arts Classroom. He didn't relish going, but Quirrell's summons made him uneasy if ignored. He set aside his alchemical studies and headed for the Data Room. Quirrell had been playing a role for a reason. If he hadn't accepted Voldemort's presence, he would not have needed to pretend at incompetence. Now the charade began to slip. "Very good, John Wick. It seems you have chosen the right path," Quirrell said when John arrived. Standing in the dim classroom at night felt like a needle pricking at the back of his skull, legilimency probing for thoughts. John shut his mind down with occlumency. He'd made real progress over the break and had recently raised occlumency to level 3. Level 3 was proficient. It could resist much, even remnants of a dark spirit. Quirrell, acting as Voldemort's conduit, was generous with knowledge. Through him, John was taught things a normal first year should never know. The new information clicked into place with a thrilled expression on John's face. He was a student in love with knowledge. Voldemort, slipping in through legilimency via Quirrell, was equally pleased. John was close to the point of loyalty. All he needed was a nudge. John attended lessons by day and returned to the Data classroom at night. His skills improved quickly. Under guidance, Twisted as it was, he gained control over fiendfire and expanded his understanding of charms and dangerous magic. His progress read like a list of achievements. Magic power, level 3, 30,1500. Charms, Alohomora, level 3. Levitation charm, level 4. Transfiguration, level 2. Disillusionment charm, level 3. Lumos, level 2. Incendio, level 3. Reducto, level 3. Fiendfire, level 2. Protego, level 2. Skills, short weapon mastery, level 7. Greatsword mastery, level 4. Firearm mastery, level 1. Runes mastery, level 1. Alchemy mastery, level 1. Buffs, physical fortification, quick attack, precision, studious, pilot, long-distance running, sword dance, troll slayer, night demon. His raw magical power hadn't risen dramatically, but his charms and practical skills had taken a big leap forward. Best of all for John, alchemy had finally activated at level 1, enough to refine simple magical items. Crafting things with independent wills, like the Sorting Hat or Gryffindor's sword, would likely require reaching much higher levels. Meanwhile, Oliver Wood had been drilling Harry relentlessly, rain or shine, shaping him for the Quidditch matches. Wood's hopes for them to beat Slytherin and win the House Cup only increased the pressure on Harry. Hermione and Ron could see how much was being expected of him, and they worried. In the common room, they begged Harry not to play in one upcoming match. Ron suggested Harry pretend to be ill. Hermione went further and said he should claim he'd broken his leg. The suggestions made Harry uncomfortable. Just then, Neville limped into the common room, his legs stuck tightly together. He'd been hit with a leg locker curse. It was obvious who was to blame. Ron wanted to storm off and confront Malfoy, but Neville waved him down. He didn't want to cause trouble for Harry or the others. Hermione undid Neville's curse with an expert flick of her wand. Harry reached into his pocket for a chocolate frog to cheer Neville up, and was surprised to find a chocolate frog card tucked inside. "What is this?" he asked, showing the glittering card. "That's the one John gave you," Ron said, remembering. "John said something about it then, too."